What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be-amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today, as we do on the show, we'll kick off with a bunch of listener calls, as I hear from the listeners on topics ranging from the fun of playing an elemental mage to the links between games like Everquest and Diablo and World of Warcraft Classic, the lore of Jaina Proudmoore as well, and old favourites Anger Management and Memory Lane, as well as a brief chat on the Feast of Winter Veil, given that it's that time of the year. Now, considering Christmas is right around the corner, the show is doing a very special giveaway for the holiday season, Countdown to Christmas. In showing my appreciation for you, the listeners, I've organised for Santa to round up 2 pre-orders for digital downloads of Warcraft 3 Reforged that you could win. So, to enter, jump on Twitter and find my account, which is at Count2Classic with the number 2. Then, step 1, follow me. Step 2, tag me in a tweet stating what your favourite episode of Countdown to Classic is and why. Step 3, at the end of that tweet, throw in the hashtag Countdown to Christmas, and you're all done. So do that now for your chance to win a copy of Warcraft 3 Reforged. If you're a patron, DM me as well and let me know, as your entry counts for 2. You'll have until midnight on Christmas Eve, and I'll announce a winner hopefully by December 26th through Twitter and the Discord. So, on with the show, and you all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you're hearing, join the Discord and keep the conversations going with all of us there. Follow the show on social media, and also email me if you'd like to call into the show, make a suggestion, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode. Now, let's get into it with Calling Countdown. All right, we've got another Countdown to Classic listener on the line, and we're speaking with Phantom's Power. How are you, mate?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thanks so much for calling in. Now, we had been talking recently about you wanting to come on the show and talk about elemental mages. Now, we talked about it a little bit on the show in the past, but only a little bit lightly. So we'll flesh it out a little bit more here today and go a bit deeper on the dive. And you've spent some time with this particular build. And even though I know what an elemental mage is and you know what an elemental mage is, just for shits and gigs, just for anyone who isn't quite sure, let's talk about what exactly a nicely balanced elemental mage is.
All right, so the mage has Arcane, Fire, and Frost. And normally you use either Fire with Arcane or Frost with Arcane. And the Elemental one would use Frost and Fire together. And there's some synergies, not a lot, but there are some synergies that work together, and especially in PvP, that's where it can shine.
Well, I definitely had read that it's something that maybe is a bit more useful for PvP. Does it have any use whatsoever in the PvE environment, being either on the journey to 60 or in any kind of raid environment?
I can't say raiding for sure. It would definitely not really be beneficial. In PvE, probably at max level, it's fun. When I first started testing it out and figuring out how I wanted to do it, I was always Fire. So I was interested in using Shatter, which gives, if in the Frost tree, it gives 50% chance on a frozen target to crit for both fire and frost and arcane, but arcane is useless. But yeah, so I did actually test it out in the world and going and killing some mobs, and it's fun. It's a fun build. So you can use it for farming. It's very bursty as well. So it's not I don't see there's any reason to use it over if you're going to do some farming frost. But if you want something different, it definitely can be used. It's kind of like maybe if you're using holy to level in a priest, you could try leveling as a elemental for shits.
Well, you described it as fun, and just to sort of focus on that a little bit more, because that's something that I dug up in my research for this call. I came across, one comment that sort of stood out to me, because I mean, that's why we play the game. We play to have the most fun with it. And from the WoW Classic subreddit, I found this from user Treasure33333, who says, Elemental is for sure the most fun build for PvP. Now, do you agree with that? And I mean, you've already said it was very fun, but what puts a smile on your face with Elemental? Why is it fun?
For me, I would say the crit. I'm a crit mage or a fire mage. That's where my heart is. So I see the 50% chance to crit. You get that Frost Nova in, and then you could either shoot off Frostbolt, you can shoot off Scorch, and then you follow that up with a Fire Blast and a Blast Wave, and you just have lots of numbers flying at once. You can also throw in a Cone of Cold, and then you trigger Frostbite, and then you go right back into it. You could throw in a Scorch, and yeah, and it's just there's a lot of things you could do. I would say it's maybe kind of a little bit like jazz. It just has it's nuanced. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know the trees well, and you have to know when to use what. And
also, is there room for ad lib?
Oh yeah, there's always room for some ad lib. You depending on how you build your trees, you could really throw in a lot of the good talents from both.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's talk about those trees and the specific talents that you might pick when you build up your elemental mage. Now, another post that I found from Axros said this: you're better off going 2130 as a PvP fire build, so no combustion. And I believe they're still describing an elemental build without combustion. And talking about combustion, they say combustion's a pretty bad spell anyway, and stuff like combustion plus blast wave is pretty meaningless unless you first get 3 to 5 stacks of combustion before blinking in for the blast wave. Overall, it's just way too slow compared to the utility of doing a presence of mind sheep / frostbolt, or the instantaneous burst from a presence of mind pyro. Now, I don't play mages. A lot of that is just speaking another language to me. What did you think of that?
There's a lot going on there. Some of it is kind of puzzling, actually. Like, I don't know why you'd blink in to do the blast wave. I usually blast wave and then blink out. But yeah, POM pyro is a great build. It's very fun, especially you really do need that for maybe if you're doing a WSG and you need that extra burst on a flag carrier to really get them down. POM pyro is the way to go.
Let's focus on that where you put your talents, because you started to touch on that, and this post said they do 2130. I'd also read something like a 2229. I mean, there are going to be very little variances here and there. Personally, what do you go with, and what talents are you picking?
Okay, yeah, so 22, 29, that's probably, I would say, the best one, 22 fire, 29 frost. I would say that, for me right now, looking at it, seems the strongest one, where you have your permafrost, which slows the target down more. You get your improved blizzard, which adds a chill effect, so then it procs frostbite, really helping with the AoE. And then you could also get your cold snap and ice block, very important in PvP as well. And really for the fire, after you get blast wave, there is less benefit going further down than that when you're doing the elemental build.
Once you sort of built yourself up and you've decided where you want to put your talents, and let's say for some reason you're just rocking battlegrounds all the time. Like you said, PvP is where it really shines. You're level 60, you're just there to kick ass and take names with all these amazing crits in your elemental build. Smelly, this is a user that I quote relatively often on the show, who I've actually reached out to try and get them to call in, but I haven't heard back. I'd love to have them on the show. User Smelly Buttocks says this: The Elementalist spec only really excels at max level after you've gathered a decent amount of spell power on your gear, since the spec is based around bursting the enemy down with instant cast and shatter crits, as you've told us about. It's not good for leveling or PvE, so whatever. During leveling, uptime is king, and the Elementalist lacks mana-saving talents, and instant spells like Fire Blast and Cone of Cold burns through too much mana compared to the damage that they deal. Definitely go Frost for leveling. So, somewhat keeping aside their comments on leveling, you've touched on the exact same thing, but we'll go stage one of this question. They talk about spell power being important, and if you go with an Elementalist mage, do your stat priorities very much so shift? And what would you start putting at the top of that list? Is it spell power?
I guess you could say that. It makes sense, right? Because you're getting the crit bonus from Shatter. So other crit talents, such as critical mass, become less important. So I can see where that comes into play, because you really do want that high spell damage in order to burst the opponent down. So I forget when I went elemental in my progression. I did rank up to rank 13. So I don't remember what my gear was at the time. I didn't really play in private servers after vanilla. So most of my experience, all my experience actually in PvP was actually during vanilla. So looking back, I can't gauge. There's a lot of battlegrounds even before our honor system came out, and a lot after that. So, like before really grinding. So it's hard to say where I was in terms of spell power. When I was building out my mage, I really did focus on crit. So you could take, so I do agree with that quote there, that spell power definitely would help this kind of build.
Okay. Well, outside of that post also went on to talk about some of the mana concerns that an elemental mage might have. And do you find that is true, that you are going to go very quickly, so you better burst that sucker down ASAP? And you know, you might have a lot of downtime drinking. Is that one of the negatives of the build?
I can't say in PvE I can't think about having times where it's a problem where you're like out of mana. There's going to be times that when it happens when you're in an intense battle. Again, it's more of a fun build, so having to drink, I never really think of it much of a problem. For me, I don't mind taking a little break, especially when I'm grinding or farming, having a little drink. I don't know, it never really bothered me. I know it does bother some people.
You also wanted to talk about fire mages. So we've just discussed the elemental build, and, you know, some people like to mix it up, you know, whether you call it the fourth spec of mages, you know, you got arcane, frost, fire, and then there's this other option of elemental. But then, you know, also, hey, how about deep fire? We've touched on this on the show. A lot of people have some great love for fire mages. And, you know, the information is out there. We've heard it all before. If you are a raider, you gotta go frost through molten core, and then it all flips around. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Then it all flips around. I think it's from AQ onwards, where you basically, you switch fire and then you never look back. But, you know, in terms of a fire mage, tell me why that spec sings out to you more than perhaps a frost mage.
Fire is just, I would say again, it goes back to being fun. I just enjoy the crit. I enjoy the ignite ticks. I don't know what it is about frost. Something about it just seems, for me, it just feels boring. And I already struggled to PvE. I did it. I went through Molten Core, Onyxia, and I went through Blackwing Lair. I kind of burnt out a bit towards the AQ and Nax. I did do, I think up to Twin Emps on AQ, and then Nax we went through a bit of that. But again, the guild also kind of fizzled out as TBC was announced. And so I didn't actually, it was a little bit depressing now, looking back at it. I didn't really get to experience the joys of being fire in AQ. And I'm hearing more and more about that, and the Rolling of Nights, and it just sounds like something I would have enjoyed. But that's something I get to look forward to in Classic. But going back to, even in Blackwing Lair, I was fire. I would say most of the time I was fire, even though I know it seems crazy, but my guild wasn't so min-maxy. This is around the time that I guess DPS meters were coming out, but I still figured around, there was about maybe 4 or 5 mages. If maybe that seems a little high or low, I'm not sure. But I was in around the third best in the PvE. Again, for me, PvE was a service to getting gear. And to PvP more. That's really what I looked at. And respecking to go Frost every time was not something that's viable. So there was a point probably where I was Frost, but I would say throughout my mage career, I was mostly Fire. And the thing about it is just big numbers, and maybe not as much when you have the resist, but just that roll, it's just about the ignite, the crit, and I think there's just more, right? You have Scorch, you have Blast Wave, Pyroblast. It just feels fun. I don't know, something about it. I just love it. And I can never really be Frost all the time. I couldn't do it.
Well, I'd love to sort of just press you a little bit further on that one, and appreciating that you said you weren't with a min-maxi guild. It's something that comes up again frequently on the show, where it's just kind of like, if it feels good, do it. The whole point of the game is to have fun. Don't let people tell you what to play. You play what you want to play. But in saying that, you are rolling through the content, what is high-end content, going through MC and BWL and whatnot, and you're there with 39 other people. Even though you weren't min-maxing, was anyone saying to you like, oh, couldn't help but notice your fire? Like, tell me about that one. Did you get any eyebrows raised at you, or everyone was totally cool with it?
No, definitely you get some pokes saying, hey, you should be Frost for in MC. You shouldn't be shooting fireballs at fire resist mobs, but I don't know. Yeah, I think it worked out in the end. I think I did do a lot of money. A lot of money did go to respecking, to appease some of the guild mates. But again, also I just spent a lot of respecting, also just doing elemental as well, just having fun, right? So again, I would talk about that. So, but yeah, if I had to go Frost and we really needed to get some stuff done, I do it. But then right after the raid's done, go back, respec, and it's PvP time, I'm going Fire. So even when Fire in PvP isn't always desirable either, really, because Frost build in PvP can be really strong too, right? You have a lot more survivability, but it's not for me.
Well, I must admit, you're giving me some confidence about the mage class, and it's a class that I have somewhat dismissed as not even being in consideration for my run through of Classic in this, really, really difficult decision that I'm going through of what class to main, because I won't have the time to really dedicate to heaps of vaults, and, people will be leveling 3-4 classes to 60. I'm realistic. It's going to be one for me. So this decision is really important. And I excluded mages just based on the whole, well, when you raid, which I'm hoping to do, you've got to go Frost and get ready for the Frostbolt spam. And I just thought that doesn't sound fun. But now hearing you say this, I'm like, well, what? Maybe I could just get with a fun guild who doesn't really give a shit and just stay Fire and just have a bit of fun. So it's good to hear that, again, the do what you feel theory kind of applies to all the classes in a way. Now, I know there are people who still might be laughing, going, listen to these guys. Oh my God, Fire and MC, are you on drugs? But hey, if you find the right people to play with, you do what you want. Now, I wanted to ask you, you said that that's something that you're looking forward to Classic for, getting to AQ and ripping through with your Fire, which you didn't do before. Are there any other mage goals that you've got for Classic?
No, I think it's all PvE, which is funny because for me it was always PvP, but I didn't get to fully, because I was ranking and I got to rank 13. After that, and then once you hear TBC's coming out, AQ, kind of, that whole thing I don't know, I just got burnt out there a bit. I did AQ 20, I did a bit of the AQ 40, but I never really saw that whole Fire Ignite thing coming back into play. So I don't know if my guild, I wasn't really focused on the game as much back then, right when that came out. So yeah, I'm really excited to do that and focus back on the PvE aspect and doing Nax and going through that, because I really didn't get the opportunity to be Fire and do all that content. So that would be really interesting. And I know I won't have time to really dedicate to ranking in PvP as much. So I do have the time to do the PvE thing again, the rating thing. And I think then that's where my focus will be this time. And it'll be really fun to do all the content again. And I actually do like Blackwing Lair a lot. I think it's a really strong instance and it's really fun. That raid is really fun for me. I really am looking forward to that again too. So just all that content, the endgame rating, even though back then, it's funny, I didn't really enjoy it as much because it's all end goal just to get the gear. But I don't know, this time I'm looking actually forward to that a lot. So that'll be my goal for this time.
Okay. Well, one last question just before I let you go. And it's something that I was wondering about, and it's just come up in Twitch chat from a previous Countdown to Classic guest Viv. You mentioned that you obviously don't mind going through BWL as fire. And I think you said as well you'll roll through MC as fire as well. And that was the one I was a bit unsure about. But how do you go being fire in MC when, as Viv says, some of the mobs are immune to fire? Does that give the guild the shits, or how does it all work?
Yeah, I don't remember how it worked. I know I would throw a few fireballs in there. Probably, I really have to struggle to remember. Maybe would just do the whole respecking thing and just did a lot of that. I know I didn't PvP as Frost much. But when you are doing elemental, going back to that, and you are PvPing, you do a lot of frost bullets actually, so it's a touch. And I have a build also that does fireball in that build as well. But yeah, I don't know. MC is an interesting point. I have to look back, but I do remember going through it as fire for a bit, and then maybe throwing a few frost bullets in where I needed to. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I can't really remember. It's so far from now, but I just remember being fire all the way through, like leveling as fire, even though it was harder. I didn't really know back then, but it was. And that was my build and I stuck to it. I was, fire strong.
Well, now, of course, if in Classic you wanted to recreate, some of the funny looks you might have gotten when going through those raids, you just do it as an arcane mage this time, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I was actually looking at some arcane builds just, for fun, but I don't know. I think that's really far-fetched.
Oh, those poor arcane mages.
Yeah, I know. They really could have used that extra spell in there, but yeah, for PvP also, you do really need that arcane. So when you go elemental, you do lose out on improved counterspell, which is a big deal. And then also if you do miss out on the POM if you're going that spec as well. But even some builds where I go deep fire, you do need that improved counterspell. Really does help. It's a big asset. But I was also talking to Viv as well, and he was saying how he always had impact. And for me, I never liked impact. Impact is the one of the first talents in fire. You could choose between that or improved fireball, and it gives you a 10% chance to stun the target for 2 seconds at the full 5. And I never actually liked that impact. For me, the 2 seconds seemed a little short, and the 10%, I don't know. I always, when I was full fire for PvP, I'd always still have my improved fireball. And I found it worked out well for me. So it's funny, you talk to different mages, especially I know Viv is a very strong fire mage as well. And I think Vel, I'm not sure if he's fire, but I know he's a big mage advocate as well.
I tried to get in touch with Vel for this call, but he mustn't have been around. I messaged him at the last minute.
Yeah, I know. So he is fire as well, I think. I don't remember. I know I talked to Viv and Vel about mages back and forth a bit since I've been on the Discord. But yeah, so yeah, it's I don't know, it's something about fire. You can't doubt it. I think you have to do what you want to do when you're playing the game, especially in vanilla. And going back to it, when you have the 1.12 talents and the itemization, I don't know, I think people think it's going to be easy. There's going to be a balance in there. And so I think you can go what you want when you have that extra bonus of the 1.12 talents and the itemization. So you won't be as frosty maybe. We'll see. I know for BWL you can go fire for sure.
All right. So one of the other things you wanted to touch on was the impact of having the benefit of having both impact and frostbite. What can you tell us about that?
All right. So the impact of having impact and frostbite is that when you're shooting your frostbolts out, you get your frostbite to trigger, which helps your shatter, right? So then also though, when you're off, you're not doing your frostbolts, you have scorch. And scorch and your fire blast and your blast wave all have a chance to hit that impact. So not only are you freezing the target in place, but you also have that 10% chance to stun. And so when your target is either using their whatever talents they have or whatever ways to get out of your movement impairing effects, they don't know what to do, right? Because you get a stun off, you have your Frost Nova going off, they don't know what to do. And they're not expecting you to be elemental. So they don't know. You come in with something fire, then they expect you're a fire mage. You come in with something frost, they think you're a frost mage. But then when you start throwing both back and forth, they don't know what to do. They're not expecting a blast wave to come in. They're not expecting you to be able to throw down an improved blizzard or throw out out cold, and that will freeze them in place with frostbite. So having that deception and having that, both the frostbite and the impact triggering, it's just a lot of CC and a lot of ways to control, but also do that burst damage. It helps you, right? Because they're not being able to control the character.
Sounded like you were very excited to get that information.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it because it really does help. It really does. That's one of the cornerstones, right? Because you have your frostbite, you have your impact, you also have cold snap with your ice block, you have your permafrost that helps your improved blizzard, and it also triggers frostbite. It works so well together, right? So it's really fun. That's why it's so fun, because you have all this stuff going on at once.
I love it.
You have to be able to manage it, and it has a high ceiling to learn. But once you're there, you're going to town.
I can hear in your voice how much fun you clearly have with it. Excellent. Well, look, Phantom's Power, thank you so much for calling in and fleshing out a bit more information about mages. I hope to talk to you again later down the track. Maybe we'll do another big group mage call and get you in on it. But thanks so much for calling in, mate.
That'd be great. And maybe some PvP talks would be fun too as well.
For sure. Thanks, mate.
And thank you. And also, just before I go, I just want to thank you for your podcast. It's been a really good outlet for me. I've been looking for something, and I finally found it. I don't remember how. It kind of bothers me that I don't remember. But right when the announcement came out, I looked for something. I found one. It didn't last. And then I gave up. And then eventually down the road, it's maybe about a month out, maybe 2 months, I found this podcast, and I've been going hard ever since. So, and now I'm on the Discord, so it's great.
Thanks so much for listening, mate. And I'm so glad that you found us, and welcome to the Countdown to Classic community. We're so glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
This week on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, we covered 1987's Lethal Weapon. What is the acceptable amount of time to watch a VHS containing a friend's now deceased daughter's amateur porno?
Ding! 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 Joshua, I believe the answer is as long as it takes.
If you'd like to hear more from the Cinephiles, then please do log on to cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. Or search for the Cinephiles on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But now, let's get back to Countdown. All right, we've got a few more Countdown to Classic listeners on the line. And say hello, David.
Hey, guys.
And Nick.
Hey.
And Ian.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks so much to all of you for coming on. Now, I just want to say that it's something that I've been busting to talk about on the show, this call here today, and it's the relationship between World of Warcraft and Everquest. All three of you played a bunch of EQ back in the day, and I'm so glad that you've all been happy to come on the show and talk about what it was about EQ that you loved, what it was about WoW that you loved, and, you know, sort of how the two, you know, crowds, if you will, crossed over in a way. So, David, I might start with you because you were kind of the catalyst behind this call. If you could just talk very briefly about your EQ background and then how you came to cross over to World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I got into EQ kind of beginning of grade 8 for me. So I was about 13 years old. I went over to a friend's house and saw him playing the game and was like fascinated by this open world. So I was just so interested in it, but I never played a PC-based game before. So I went out and I begged my parents to buy me a PC and got dug into the game. Now, EQ basically was like, well, it took a bigger learning curve. So I did it for about 3 years. And then at the end of kind of grade 10 for me, I got a long-term girlfriend and I got out of the game and basically didn't pick up playing until the beginning of 2005 when I got back into vanilla World of Warcraft. So it wasn't that vanilla WoW actually like removed me from EQ. I kind of took a break in between.
Okay, fair enough. Nick, do you have a similar story, or did you find that you never took a break and you loved EQ and played it the whole time up through to World of Warcraft's release?
Well, I didn't get a long-term girlfriend like Dave, so I stuck around for a little bit longer than he did. I managed to make it up to, I think it was Gates of Discord when they introduced the Berserker class to EverQuest, which was a big mistake. And then I stopped after that. Then Dave got me into Classic. Wow.
Okay, and you guys played a lot of Classic WoW together back in the day. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I have years played time.
Fantastic. And Ian, we'll turn to you. You're also someone who dived down the EQ rabbit hole. How much EQ did you play back in the day?
So I got introduced to EverQuest from my oldest brother. It was like just before he left for college in 2000. It was like June or July of 2000. And then I made a character on his account. And over time, he kind of faded off from playing EverQuest, and I just took the account over from him, and I played that, I think until Depths of Dark Hollow, I think it was when, right around when Vanilla was in its, like, golden age, I suppose. And there was a lot of back and forth between those two games that I was kind of juggling a little bit. But then, I've been playing on a private server on and off. It's a classic up to Velius, which was the second expansion. I've been playing that on and off from about 2010 until this year.
Okay. Now, David, what were some of the things that EQ did right that kept you playing, that you fell in love with from an MMO design aspect?
Part of the reason is like the world was so vast, and I had never seen that before. I just played like N64, and there was basically like all these new zones that I knew nothing about. And even more so than vanilla WoW, there's no way of like finding out about the rest of the world unless you went and explored it yourself. On top of that, it was one of these first games where it had you had to rely on other people, and you were playing with not only your real life friends, but you're building these new relationships and communities. And the interesting thing about like EQ is you really only played with people that were pretty serious about the game. There really wasn't such a thing as a casual. Like I played 4 hours a day, and I probably was considered a casual back then.
Nick, did you find that sort of time demand was something that you liked or loathed about the game? Were you frustrated by how much time you had to invest, or you were, a kid who could have given more time, if anything?
No, it was great. It was such a grind that when you accomplished anything, you felt like a real sense of accomplishment. I think that's probably the greatest strength of the game, was like how much pride it gave you to actually accomplish something. And touching on what Dave said, without the internet, like you're just exploring everything on your own and talking to other people around you. So that was kind of cool.
Ian, were there things that you loved about EQ that when you heard about World of Warcraft, you really hoped would come over to that game, or any other MMO that you might have been interested in playing?
Ironically, I really enjoyed the Bard class in EverQuest. I was pretty bummed out when I remember there was an April Fool's joke when they teased the Bard class in World of Warcraft, and I thought we were going to get it, and we didn't. But there were a lot of things. So EverQuest was like super in depth, from trade skills to individual class skills. It was essentially like D&D, but it was a video game. And World of Warcraft's really simplified a lot of those things, but still you can kind of see now, knowing that a lot of the devs from your interview with John Statz played a lot of EverQuest. You can see that there's this level of, I don't want to say homage, but I guess it's inspiration from EverQuest. Some of the trade skill aspects maybe less involved, but still exist, I would say, probably because EverQuest is like that forefather of the MMO genre.
It was the first game that had like that much depth, like all the different classes, all the spells, the professions, the vastness of the world. Like it was pretty amazing for its time.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about it before we started recording, but the population, I think, at its max for EverQuest was about 500,000 or so. So even in its heyday, it pales in comparison to the tens of millions of players that were playing by the time Wrath of the Lich King was out. So it's few and far between, I would say, that you see players now that are playing Warcraft that played EverQuest. But maybe when you see players that are playing, this classic Warcraft experience, and you'll see those people that are kind of itching for a game that was good when it was young, like EverQuest was.
David, did you find that there were things with EverQuest that you didn't like, that you were, if you were designing your own MMO, that you knew, oh God, I would never put that in another game?
People think that like vanilla WoW is like a slow, grindy game, and they have no idea. Literally, the amount of time that you sit and when you're sitting and drinking, you stare at a spell book. You don't actually get to see the world. So the amount of time that I sat there staring at my spells and like reading a book or doing that is just crazy. So like the amount of downtime was a bit extreme. And on top of that, like the combat system was rather clunky. Like the PvP system in WoW is so like interesting, where you basically can outplay other people. And it's not like you couldn't do that in EQ, but it just felt so clunky in comparison.
Now, Nick, if I can ask you this, and perhaps this is one of the meatier questions of the call already, in that, what is it that you think, as, you and your friends were going through EQ, and then World of Warcraft gets released, and you hear about this new game, this new MMO, and it's, tantalizing a few people with, oh, this might be, something here. What do you think sung out about WoW to the EverQuest player base?
Well, I can only speak from personal experience. And for me, as soon as I watched, I just went over to Dave's house and watched him play for a couple hours, and like all the things that I grew to hate about EverQuest, like the staring at the spell book for excessive amounts of time, and the like mile long trains of mobs chasing you out of the zone, before you could enter back in, and corpse camping you. You had NPCs corpse camping you in EverQuest. So when I saw that they'd kind of taken all that out of World of Warcraft, just sort of like the ease of experience, the user friendliness, and they actually did a really good job of making it a smooth transition for anyone who'd already played an MMORPG like that to start playing World of Warcraft. It didn't seem like a drag. It seemed like an improvement on quality of life.
Talking about that improvement of quality of life, and it was definitely something that people started hearing to be touted as the more casual MMO when WoW came on the market. And obviously a lot of people, such as yourself, had been grinding and grinding away, just like we've heard about from all of you. Oh, it was a bit of a grind, but I loved it. And then you hear about this more casual MMO that's coming onto the market. Coming from a game where you had things like, we heard in developer interviews, players would effectively block dungeon areas off, even though I know there were no instances in EQ, but you'd get these caves or dungeon areas being blocked off by players. They'd form walls outside, as John Stats explained on the show. Did you sort of lament the fact that a more casual MMO was coming? Did you want to see it as hardcore as EQ was?
Well, I played the Warcraft RTS games growing up. So when I saw that there was going to be an MMO version of a series that I've already played, I was really excited to see what that was. And there is a fear, I guess. You're playing a game for so long, and it is what it is, and you grow an affinity towards that type of a game, and then something new comes along, and all your player base, you're watching it just dwindle away, and you're seeing servers merge because players are going to this new thing. You're thinking, okay, maybe I should check it out. And to be honest, I was really surprised at how well I thought that, World of Warcraft, the developers of World of Warcraft took out kind of those really kind of sloggy and just super difficult things and improved on all of it. To the point that where EverQuest, after maybe I think it's level 5, you are almost, except for a few classes, solely reliant on grouping with people in order to level. Whereas Warcraft, they made it so that, yeah, there are things that you'll need a group to do, but you aren't required to have a group in order to just play and enjoy the game. They made it accessible for a lot more people, and I think that's where a lot of that success comes from.
One of the things that I found really interesting with your interview with John Stats is how they stumbled in the alpha or the beta, how much people appreciated quests. and how that for the casual really, really helped the game. And ironically, even though the game's called EverQuest, it's mainly grinding. There is very few quests, and to find those quests is actually a lot of work. So I think part of the success for WoW drawing so many casuals is this whole quest system that they set up.
Yeah, and you got to consider too with EverQuest, when you die, you lose experience. So it could take you, say, 3-4 hours to get 20% of a level, and you die once, and all of that progress is gone. When you die, you're naked and you're at a bind point, and you have to run all the way back to wherever you died, get your stuff. So when Dave was talking about mobs corpse camping you, literally your body with all of your armor was there, and you were alive, not as a ghost. So that's another thing that I think that they really improved on, was making it possible for you to kind of get your stuff back and get your feet set on the ground in World of Warcraft before these mobs start attacking you again.
Was there anything else that, I think I made the crack that, having heard that there weren't any quests, ironically, in Everquest, that perhaps the game should have been called NeverQuest, and I secretly hope I'm the first person who said that, even though I know I'm not. I wonder if there's anything else that you've talked about, how the multitude of quests in WoW was something that really, really was received well by people who may have come over from Everquest. Was there anything else specifically that WoW did that you wished had been in Everquest? I'll open that one up to any one of you.
While I did enjoy kind of grinding through open dungeons in EverQuest, once I got the taste of what instancing looked like, I thought that at least from a raid perspective in EverQuest, it would have been a little bit more beneficial, I guess, for the player base as a whole to have something like that, where you aren't competing with everyone else on the server to try to get, it's essentially just world bosses at that point. So you have some of those in vanilla WoW, like the Azure Dragons and the what do you call it? The name is escaping me right now, but that's how every boss was in EverQuest. Essentially, they were all accessible, as long as in some zones you needed keys to get into, but a lot of them were just in the open world. And having an instance in order to fight those bosses, it kind of gives everybody a chance to experience that content, I thought was something that EverQuest maybe missed.
I thought that basically, like EQ, because there was no other game like it at the time, it did so well, but there was a lot of glitches within the game. Like, it would glitch out all the time. And it's hard to say specifically what WoW did, but it felt like in every respect a more polished game. Like the mobs were tethered, so you didn't have these massive like chains of mobs like running throughout the zone, which is fairly odd. Like the spell system, the combat system, like everything just seemed so much better. Like it was like this game, like WoW had been produced for like 5 years. I think AQ was made in 2 to 3 years. It really didn't feel like it had the same polish that WoW did.
Now, in terms of what people were talking about around the time of WoW's release, you've talked about people making the conversion over and jumping over to get on WoW from the outset. But while EQ was still going on, was anyone talking about WoW in-game? Was there in-game chatter going, hey, have you heard about this new thing apparently the Blizzard's doing? Are you guys going to check it out? Yeah, we should start a guild over there, blah, blah, blah. No, you're idiots. Stay here. Don't check out any new games. Was that kind of chatter going on at all?
Yeah, there was, but most of it was kind of shut down immediately. People that still were playing EverQuest and weren't planning on playing World of Warcraft, were very adamantly against the whole concept of WoW. I don't even know if they ever experienced it, but it was just them saying it's EverQuest on easy mode. It's like an easy MMO. It's this, that, and the other thing. It's not a real game, basically. It's not, they just kind of flexing their own muscles playing EverQuest and how difficult it was, as though they're mutually exclusive games under the same umbrella of an MMO. So there's a lot of the social aspect, the fantasy aspect, grouping and all that is all the same. And it's just the little fine tunings here in World of Warcraft that EverQuest didn't have. And it's like Dave said, it was a titan in its own right. It was the forefather of what we have now for MMOs. We had Ultima Online before EverQuest, but it wasn't a first person view. You weren't seeing your character you weren't your character in the world. You were kind of outside in Ultima Online looking down at the world. So EverQuest, it has its own claim, I guess, but there were players in the game that were very adamantly against World of Warcraft just for its existence.
The funny thing I find is that how vanilla players talk about retail players right now, like they're filthy casuals. Like that's how EQ players used to talk about people that play classic WoW.
Right. Interesting. I never even thought of that. It's probably a fantastic point to make. Yeah, I'm sure that would have been happening back in the day. Well, can I ask, were any of you, well, maybe I'll start with you, Ian, and I'll ask the rest of you guys the same question. Were any of you intrigued at all in other EQ titles as they came out later down the track? Obviously, WoW comes out, EQ's watching, they see the millions of people jump on board, and they're like, well, hang on, we're the OG over here. We can do it all again. And then EQ2 happens, and, that sort of doesn't really turn into anything. And then other titles come out. I think Everquest next, the problems that came up with that project. Were any of you hoping to see EQ restored to its former glory? And were you tempted to go and jump back on, did you play EQ2 when it came out or anything? Ian, I'll start with you.
No, I didn't play any EverQuest 2. I did follow EverQuest Next for quite a while, hoping that was going to be a good game. And from the gameplay that I remember them releasing, it looked like it was fun. And then suddenly they kind of just announced, we're not going to release the game. We're abandoning it. It's just what it comes down to. What they said was the game isn't fun. And we don't want to release a game that's not fun. So as much as I would like to have seen that brand kind of come back to its glory, I think watching these failed experiments, kind of back to back is just them chasing the dragon a little bit and just really not being able to get to that point.
David, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, and the thing is, the reason I didn't switch back is I had invested so much time in WoW that basically all of these games require a lot of time, and I couldn't split either way. And to be honest, me and Nick discovered the PvP system in WoW, and we absolutely fell in love with it. And we just didn't feel like EQ had that same system, so we were kind of like addicted to that.
Yeah, EQ's PvP system, I remember it was like when you killed a player, you could loot one piece of item off their body except for their chest item or their weapon. So like you put in all this time and effort into this game, takes hours, you camp one mob for 3 days and it's not even guaranteed to drop what you want. You eventually get it and then somebody can kill you and just take it. It's just very anti-reward driven, I think.
Now, do you bump into many players in World of Warcraft that for some reason it comes up in conversation that they played EQ2, or do you think that a lot of EQ players didn't make the jump?
Throughout my history playing WoW, I bumped into very few players, and I think that number diminished quite quickly. So I knew some in vanilla, a little bit in BC, but then when I quit around Wrath, a lot of them had left, I feel.
Okay. And
I think we missed Nick's response to that previous question.
Oh, sorry. You're exactly right, Nick. I'm so sorry. Please, do hit me up. Were you intrigued by any of the other EQ titles?
Yeah, actually, I was actually a huge console fan. And so when they came out with EverQuest Online Adventures, I just like the idea of being able to sit on my couch and do the same thing with a controller in my hand. So I got EverQuest Online Adventures for PlayStation 2, and I tried getting into that. I gave it a really fair shot, but it was very shallow, and it just seemed like they were rushing games to shelf without really putting that much thought or effort into them. And I don't think you can really have a deep MMORPG with back then what were pretty basic controllers and not a lot of advanced controller options and stuff like that. So gave up on that pretty quickly. That was 2012. They came out with a PlayStation game.
Flowing on from EQ, we've seen, maybe a bit of a lack of games of that nature in recent years. But one that's come up recently, as I'm being reminded in Twitch chat by listener Viv, is Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Now, with all of you being big EQ fans, and I think it's not controversial to say that WoW and EQ have very different tones. WoW is a bit more cartoony, a little bit, I wouldn't go so far as calling it kiddie, but, I think there is a difference in maturity somewhat in terms of the tone of the content. With something like Pantheon Rise of the Fallen coming, in the next, year or two to the MMORPG market, is that something that you guys would be looking towards? And Ian, I'd ask something that's a bit more adult or darker or grindier. Would you be looking to jump off the WoW ship for something like that if you kept an eye on it?
I have a little bit, mostly just because I think is it Brad McQuaid Pantheon? It's like a labor of love for him. So I root for him because he, brought us Everquest, which was a game that I hold near and dear to my heart. So I'm sure I'll check it out. I do enjoy kind of darker tone games as well. Sort of like Bloodborne and Dark Souls, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So if there's an MMO that's kind of in that vein, I'm sure I would check it out. I know that Warcraft has a winning method with vanilla, so I know I'm going to be playing that. And it's kind of just that jump off into the unknown again, with Pantheon whenever that is released. I'm sure I'll check it out though.
David, how about you? Any interest in Pantheon?
Josh, I would love to get into Pantheon, but because I'm legally blind, one of the reasons I love classic WoW is because of how cartoony and simple it is. My fear is with Pantheon that I won't be able to see the game clearly enough to be competitive.
Fair enough. And that's a topic that we'll be hitting on once this call is done. We'll be going into, your time spent playing MMOs and gaming in general with the physical impairment that you have with your, visual, issues, obviously. But, Nick, if I can touch on this with you, do you share any of the sentiments that Ian raised in terms of, something a bit more adult or dark being, intriguing to you in the slightest with Pantheon coming out?
It could be. There's just something nostalgic about EverQuest and WoW though. And so I guess it's the same as going back and playing your old Sega Genesis. But, Pantheon, I mean, there's a few, new twists on MMORPG that are going to be included in that game. So if you're looking for something a little bit, different or that you haven't seen before, I think that would be like probably a good option to check it out. With vanilla coming out, I'm definitely just going to stick with that though.
Okay, fair enough. I'll take a quick tangent here because we've had a listener question arise in Twitch chat just now from Countdown to Classic listener Summerlin, who's very active in the Discord. And this means nothing to me, but it will mean something to you guys, I've got no doubt. And whoever wants to answer first, please do jump in. Maybe you've all got the same answer. But Summerlin asks, did any of you guys get into the PvP trick in EQ where you would level up and get the high level armor and then intentionally de-level and keep all your higher level armor because there was no level requirement for armor so that you were basically a god? Do you know what she's saying there?
Yeah. I know that you could pretty much die enough to get, I think level 5 was when you started losing experience. So you could de-level, I think, to that point. You could also sell, sacrifices to necromancers. So, necromancers would get these coffins, and they would have to sacrifice a player. It would drain experience from them and it would allow them to summon corpses. Mm-hmm. So you could sell kind of your experience to a player down to like 45. And then you could just die a bunch down to 5 and you have all of this, raid armor essentially. And then you can just wreak havoc across all the low level zones as much as you want. Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. I haven't done it, but I was on the receiving end quite a few times.
Anyone else had any experience with that?
The main thing me and Nick struggled with is it wasn't some people did take it to that extreme and they were literally like gods, but there was a particular item and it would be considered a twink item now, which was called a fungi tunic. And basically, that could be put on a lower level character and it gave them such amazing regen that you couldn't damage them fast enough to kill them. They would regen faster. So even someone like putting that on one of their lower level characters, like, Nick, do you want to tell a story about being, near the Wood Elf, place?
I remember being chased by somebody wearing a fungi and we were higher levels than them and we were ganging up on them and trying to take them down and we couldn't do it. He ended up killing us. So, like, that doesn't seem fair.
And you the fungi.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Basically,
go ahead. It's all you.
Yeah, and like it was ridiculous. Like we would go down the lifts out of like the Wood Elf like village, and literally this guy would camp us over and over again. And it got to the point where Nick is like the darkies, man. They're waiting out there for us, and it was the dark elves, like rogues, and he would basically have like night terrors about them, like ganking us repeatedly.
I still wake up in cold sweats.
Yeah, if you had like an ogre with a fungi tunic, it was an unstoppable force because ogres had a racial trait that prevented them from being stunned from the front. So if you were, a character that could bash and stun somebody, you weren't able to do it to an ogre if you were in front of them. And if they had the fungi tunic on top of it, they would just, gain health faster than you could take it down. And it was just this unstoppable wall coming at you.
Now, David, you mentioned that you had a few points that you wanted to hit on in terms of maybe some of the differences between EQ and WoW and whatnot. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you'd love to dive a bit deeper into?
Ian touched on it a bit. The instancing of dungeons and raids was a big change, but in my opinion, one that provided a much better experience. I think that a lot of the times that when you go in and you want to raid, you don't really want to be ganked once you're in there. I think it was fun that on the way there, people wait for you in Blackrock Mountain and basically gank you on the way in. That was a lot of fun. But I think the fact that WoW decided to instance those was a really good decision. It allowed people to really enjoy the PvE experience strictly. There are some things that World of Warcraft just made better. One of my favorite things about EQ was they came out with auction houses, but it wasn't in the same way. You basically had to leave your character logged on, sitting in a bazaar with all the items sitting on them. So I would have my computer on all the time, literally with all the items on it. And then you could go to basically a search menu and search all these items that people had left on their people. But you had to have your character logged in the whole time.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was a little bit of a bizarre design philosophy. So you had all these characters sitting in this area. You're not on them. They just have them stationed there.
Well, basically like real life before the internet. If you wanted to sell something, you had to set up your stall.
Yeah, pretty much. You set prices for your character, and then once you hit the button, you basically turned into a merchant. And a lot of people kind of started to quit EverQuest when that zone came out, because prior to that, the majority of players went to a zone called East Commonlands. It was right outside of one of the human cities, in this low-level zone, this giant tunnel that led to another zone. But people just for whatever reason across all the servers for the most part set up shop, and they would just, spam auction chat with what they were selling, and people would come up and you could haggle with people. And it was a lot more community driven in that respect. And then when the Bazaar came out, it kind of took all that away. It was kind of just faceless people that you were just buying stuff from, and there was no conversation about it. Or hey, why don't I give you this much platinum? And this item as well. There was no concept of trading stuff anymore. It was, I think a big downfall for them.
Yeah. So it's this whole interesting point of quality of life, right? when is it too much, right? When does it benefit the game enough to actually have them versus the downsides? And it's just this very interesting point of how do you balance it properly? And the interesting thing is that the MMORPG genre is based upon always coming out with new content that continuously interests people, right? Whereas League of Legends, basically the meta is always changing, and people are almost creating their own new meta to things. So it always stays somewhat interesting. But WoW, to a certain extent, and EQ, they constantly have to come up with new challenges. And because that's puts the onus on the developer, they're trying to come up with new ideas. And sometimes they think they're coming up with these great ideas, but the quality of life changes, the new things that they're introducing actually have a really big negative impact on the game.
Yeah, one of those changes was later on, way after I stopped playing. They came out with mercenaries, and you could buy NPCs essentially that would take up group slots. And you didn't really have to play with other people anymore. You could just solo, but you had 4 or 5 NPCs that were in a group with you that were played by the computer and did all the things that they were supposed to do for whatever class it was that you purchased. So if you purchased a cleric mercenary, it would just heal you when you needed it. It would give you buffs when you needed them. If you bought, DPS ones, they would just DPS with you. It totally shut you off from the other players in the game if you needed to, unless you were raiding, of course.
Yeah, how odd. Now, if I could just turn to wrap things up about sort of what brought about the demise of EQ, the release of WoW notwithstanding. But Nick, you said something interesting at the very start of this chat where you said, when they released the Berserker class, you really disagreed with that and you thought it was something that, took the game down a path that you didn't like. If I could just get you to go into that a bit more, and also, are there any other points as EQ developed that you felt it started to move away from what you fell in love with, and what was kind of the cause for the decline of EQ design-wise?
Well, I think they were dealing with, one of the biggest problems is they had really old, shitty code, and that was kind of, I think, the reason they decided to make a whole new game in EverQuest 2, because right from the get-go, it was operating from a flawed sort of space. Like, you could run around and you would get stuck on tears in the map that you couldn't see. And your character would get stuck and you'd have to jump out of these like invisible like traps that were set around. And like when they started coming out with Gates of Discord, I think somewhere around that expansion, they came out with a race called Froglocks, and you could be a frog. As soon as they did that, they'd already came out with cats and berserkers, which were essentially just recycling mechanics that they'd already used.
Wait. I can play a cat in EQ? I'm in.
Yeah.
Picture like the Thundercats. It was essentially that as a race.
I see.
You could be a dual wielding, staff wielding cat monk and just like go around tiger kicking things. It was like,
I think you just described what I've wanted to be my whole life.
There you go. We found the game for you, but frogs, not for me. No thanks.
The expansion that I at first took a break from the game from was Planes of Power, and there was a zone called Plane of Knowledge. It was like sort of the central point of that expansion. But what it did was in each, maybe there were 30 blocks in the zone that would take you to different points in the world. And I played a druid for a long time. And one of the key components to that class in the early game, the early years of the game rather, was that, people would buy ports from you. So like, it'd be like sort of what mages do in the capital cities. They sell portals to people, elsewhere, but you kind of took a whole group of people with you and went to this place. And when that new zone came out, it killed that economy for that class and the wizard class as well, because they were very high. They both had ports to different areas, and it almost made them obsolete for that respect. So they had these spells that, they pretty much didn't use anymore. And again, this is because the game focused so heavily on relying on other people. The community was really great. And everyone kind of was in this tough situation together. We're in this war together type thing. And it's like, we're all fighting for the same thing. We all know the struggle. And then these quality of life changes come to the game. And then slowly it's like the personability of people went away.
Ian, if I can get you to wrap up on this one and just say, is there anything else you can add on to that as to what may have led to the demise of EQ in your eyes?
I think too much. I think it just, the game is now at like 26 expansions or something. It's just way too much content. They never knew when to stop.
No, I'm along the same lines of like Ian, but I honestly think there's also the thing of like expectations, right? Like EQ is still running today. There's still expansions coming out, right? Like I think EQ maxed out at 500,000. So it's interesting, like, and I just wanted to like touch on this because it's an interesting thing that's happening right now is basically companies like determining success, right? So EQ now, like it is still running. So there might be the thing of like, no, this game hasn't failed. It hasn't stopped. There's still people playing it. So maybe it hasn't essentially failed. But if you look at how much money it's making, yeah, it's complete disaster. But so the companies like Blizzard now are looking at MMORPGs and considering them failures because of how much money microtransactions are making in other games. So I just think it's a really interesting point to end on because depending on what your expectations are for the game to be successful.
Fair enough. All right, guys, look, I'll wrap it up there, and it's not because of, the content of the chat. I can assure you that much is purely time related. I'd love to go into this, even more later down the track. So maybe we'll do a part 2 of this at some point, later on in the show when I can think of a few more specific points I can raise as to what happened to EQ, and more so just the finer parts of that game that people really did appreciate and showed love for, that maybe differentiated it between World of Warcraft. But thank you so much to all of you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hi everyone, Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic, and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, we've got another Countdown to Classic listener on the line, and we're speaking with Onyx. Is that right?
Yes. Hey, Josh. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for calling in, mate. I do appreciate it. And I want to thank you doubly for calling in, for sort of diving in a bit of uncharted waters here on Countdown to Classic, because we're going to be touching on a subject that isn't technically World of Warcraft related. It's Blizzard related, but it's something that has been hot in the news lately, and we're going to weave the conversation back into World of Warcraft later on, so I'll make it somewhat relevant. Don't worry, listeners. But a lot of you listeners are also into other Blizzard IPs, one of which being Diablo. And Diablo's had a little bit of a rocky time in the last couple of weeks, since there was a big announcement made at BlizzCon this year involving the announcement of a new title, which is going to be Diablo Immortal, available soon on mobile. Now, this news, I think it's fair to say, was somewhat negatively received. Let's maybe throw away the somewhat. It was negatively received on the whole by the community. However, not everyone had bad things to say about it. Those, some people had some open minds and said, well, maybe I'll either try it or watch the footage or just be positive about it. And Onyx, you reached out as one of those people. You said that not only are you a big Diablo fan, you're actually quite excited about Immortal. So maybe I'll start on that first. Can you tell me what was going through your mind as you were either watching BlizzCon live and saw the announcement, or saw the trailer after the fact?
Okay, so I got to piggyback BlizzCon through Reddit, and I paid attention. So what I saw was the initial negative feedback of Diablo Immortal being announced. And I thought, well, of all the things that Blizzard could do, making a mobile game of Diablo was probably not the smartest. However, it's something that I'm absolutely going to download no matter what. I'm going to play it and probably very well enjoy it.
Now, you mentioned to me that, not only are you a Diablo fan, but you're also quite the mobile gamer. Is that right? You love mobile games.
That's true. And there just aren't many good mobile games, for that matter. It's a lot of pay to win kind of thing. And it's just that phones out there, they don't have what in my opinion, is necessary to be a functioning game service or a game device. That, and you've got battery life and everything else, but I think it could work out really well.
Well, if I can ask, what kind of games are you either playing at the moment on your mobile, or in the past that have held your attention, that have just kind of, steadied you over while you wait for something fantastic?
Yeah, for sure. So, Crashlands, that's just a phenomenal game that you can get on mobile. It's available on other devices, but it's pretty good. But outside of that, Eternium, which is kind of like a little Diablo clone, I play that, and that's pretty good. But to me, it is what Diablo can be on mobile, and I think that if Blizzard tries to do anything else or add things to it, it's just not going to work out. Say, for instance, Diablo on console or on PC, you can start pulling Greater Rift 95, 96, and you're going to start getting performance issues based on the software alone. I don't know how a phone is going to be able to pull Greater Rifts of that extent.
Well, you also mentioned to me, I mean, as we said, you're quite a Diablo fan, But it's not just that. You have spent some time with the franchise before, obviously, but you sound like you're far from a casual fan. I think you mentioned a couple of things that you said that you've competed in multiple seasons. You've gotten in top 500s a couple of seasons. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with Diablo?
Okay, so I started playing Diablo back with the very first Diablo game. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. I found it by chance at a garage sale for 50 cents. It was
Nice.
the original CD. It was quite the experience because the only other game I had played at that time was Age of Empires.
Mm-hmm.
And I jumped right into it. It was rated M for gore, and here I am thinking, what a steal. Like, I got this adult game and I'm going to play it, and you just click and click and click, and you get to about level 2 or 3 and the butcher just decimates you, and you decide to rage quit and create a new character, and you realize that you get to keep that level, and I did that for a good long time. Diablo 2 came out, and I did not play that. But come around Diablo 3, I got into it, and it just, one of the greatest games I've ever played. As far as min-maxing, I don't find that I'm one of the greatest players in the community, but any standard player I don't think that they're going to understand endgame content for what it really is until they get into it for a while.
Well, I had an interesting chat with a few people at BlizzCon, albeit when I was drunk, but it was still a great chat. And we were talking Diablo, and a lot of listeners know I'm not a Diablo guy. I'm waiting for the Diablo title to suck me into the franchise. I'm like, I'm here, Diablo. I'm here for the taking. I love your theme. I love your story. I love sort of, the look and everything. But, I played Diablo 3 when it first came out, and I didn't really like it that much, and I found it pretty easy to walk away. But the people I was talking to at BlizzCon said, oh, well, there's your first problem. And I'm like, what? They said, you played it when it first came out. It's an entirely different game now. So how has Diablo 3 changed?
That's amazing. And that's something that's very important too. Just to go on to World of Warcraft for a second.
Yeah.
The game has progressed extraordinarily with World of Warcraft. I apologize. And there's so many things that are in the game now that could never have been expected in the beginning. And it doesn't really seem like there was a clear direction. It's just like, hey, let's add this content. Hey, let's add that content. With Diablo 3, they have added incredible amounts of content. Even look at the Treasure Goblin, for instance. I don't know if you're into it at all now, but they've got goblin shrines that drop, more goblins than you can hit. Legendaries are just, it's so rewarding to see those gem goblins or those blood shard goblins. And it creates its own atmosphere, in my own opinion, with how much they've added to it. And Kadala, if anyone out there prays to RNGesus, I believe it's Kadala.
Well, I mean, talking about what the game turned into and how sort of beloved it is amongst the community now, despite the fact that you're quite optimistic for Diablo Immortal, can you understand the anguish that the majority of the fan base have gone through, having come off all this love for what Diablo 3 turned into, to not get their next PC game announced at BlizzCon or coming yet?
Oh, absolutely. So Diablo is primarily a PC game. It expanded its borders out to consoles, and I think that that's great. It allows something that I love to be experienced by other people in a medium that they wouldn't have particularly enjoyed before. As a PC gamer, I can't just go and tell all my console gamer friends that they need to jump on World of Warcraft. They'll say it's too expensive of a startup. With Diablo, they can get that initial oomph and in to see what Blizzard is like. But you got to remember, at the end, it is a PC game, in my opinion, and it's made to function on a high-performance computer at the end of the day. When you tell a min-maxing community of people who, want the highest, most performing specs and the best case scenario of your classes and powers and abilities, when you tell somebody that you're going to put that over to a mobile device, I can see it being a very big heartbreak and upset. The only reason I have the availability to play it on my phone is because, well, at work, I have the opportunity to try to slack off a little bit. Of course, when you can walk instead of run, you will. When you can sit instead of stand, you will. And if I can play Diablo Immortal on my phone at work, I will.
Well, if I can just add, so initially I was hoping to have a contrary voice on this call as well. and that will happen another time. It just didn't happen during this particular call. But so if you're sitting there sort of thinking, Josh is just glossing over and focusing on the positive for Diablo. Why doesn't he focus on the negative? Well, we'll get there one day. We're doing the positive now, the negative later. But just to push you a little bit further in terms of what you saw at BlizzCon and taking into the account the fact that you are excited for this game, when you see, that now quite famous or infamous person approach the microphone at BlizzCon and say, is this an out of season April Fool's joke? And then the total can of worms that opened. And I can tell you at BlizzCon, it was a kind of weird 2 days because a lot of people were talking at the end of the day when they got on the drink, and what we're seeing online about this concept of gamer entitlement. And I don't want to sort of go down that road too much, but everything that it brought up, do you still think that if you could choose, you would still prioritize another type of Diablo title over what you got? Like, would you prefer still the next Diablo 4 on PC? Would you prefer a Diablo MMO? Or is it still like, no, I wanted a Diablo MMO? Like, where would you put it in the rankings of what you wanted?
Okay, so I would have loved for them to say that here's Diablo 4. It's time, in my opinion. It's absolutely time. When they say here's Diablo Immortal, I think they could have done much better creating a different kind of skin and a different kind of copy to start a mobile franchise. Assassin's Creed originally came from Prince of Persia. Our Hearthstone seems to me a lot like Magic the Gathering, and our Heroes of the Storm is, another version of League of Legends. I apologize to anyone who I offended there because these are still different games, but, it's a different skin in my opinion. And I think that if they would have had a different title, different story arc, different everything, and started from the ground up with the basic same engine, hack and slash this, get loot drops for that, and named it something else, I think Blizzard fans would have been extremely excited. But you're taking a game that for PC gamers, I can see them getting upset. But as a consumer and as a former casual player, and probably still current casual player, something just have to have.
Did you see some of the gameplay from Diablo Immortal? Now, one thing I'll tell you is that despite the negative backlash that the announcement got, everyone I spoke to at BlizzCon that actually tried the game did, funnily enough, say that they really liked it. So did you see the gameplay, and what did you think of it?
I saw some gameplay, and, I'm excited. It looked just like I can play it on my phone. And of course, if I can play it on my phone, I'm going to try to figure out what Bluetooth controllers work with it and all the other things. But I don't know how practical it'll be. Again, I'm very positive. And the gameplay, it's not that high definition that I'm expecting from Diablo. Because I'm trying to say this from a Diablo fan perspective as well. But as a Blizzard fan, it's something I find that I'll enjoy. I apologize for continuing to say that I'll enjoy it. But.
No, that's not a problem at all. I'm glad to have found. I thought it'd be really hard to find someone who was optimistic about this, but it was funnily, I've gone through sort of the Funhouse Mirror version of it, where it's been somewhat of a struggle to find someone who wants to call into the show to jump on the dog pile, if you will, and say that this is all shit and blah blah blah. And I bumped into you straight away, who said like, no, I'm actually really positive about it. So I think that's fantastic. But just to transition a little bit, we try to weave things into World of Warcraft somewhat on the show. Now, obviously you're a World of Warcraft fan as well, and you've stated that you're a Diablo fan. What would you say is the correlation between the two? Do you find that most people who like Diablo play World of Warcraft, or not so much? And what do you think is it between the two franchises, that really should speak out to the two crowds and link us all?
So I think any casual gamers are going to both enjoy Diablo and they're going to enjoy World of Warcraft. However, people who I find really, really, truly play World of Warcraft and try to get to the end game content, say heroic, mythic rating, especially mythic rating, I see them getting really bored with Diablo. It just doesn't have all of the components in it like World of Warcraft would have. If there was a comparison of the two, I would say Isle Expeditions and Greater Rifts are where the two games meet with one another. However, Diablo does Greater Rifts amazingly, and trying to implement that in World of Warcraft, it just doesn't work to me. It feels wrong.
Fair enough. Now, is it the case that let's say hypothetically, and something that people picked for BlizzCon, even though personally I think there was there's no chance this is happening as long as World of Warcraft is alive, and that was a Diablo MMO. And I've said, and Blizzard has told us, they don't want to do two MMOs at the same time. So I think whether or not we get a StarCraft MMO or a Diablo MMO or a new MMO, whatever, that will never happen while World of Warcraft is alive and well. However, in the hypothetical world where, let's say they announced Diablo, an MMO, and Classic is coming out and all that jazz. If you got all these healthy MMO options, would you dive straight into the Diablo MMO over World of Warcraft?
Absolutely not.
Sorry, absolutely not, did you say?
Yeah, absolutely not. It's not going to happen. It just wouldn't be for me. I've tried other MMOs that are out there, Black Desert Online, Star Wars Old Republic. They just don't do it for me like World of Warcraft does. I'm too invested in the game. I've got too many friends on it. You know, it's just having a Diablo MMO would take me away from, you know, getting my dailies completed and getting that weekly chest.
Fair enough. All right. Look, Onyx, thanks so much for calling in, and thanks for taking the time out for Countdown to Classic. It was fun to touch on something a little bit outside of the World of Warcraft, box that we always talk in. It won't be the last time we necessarily touch on other Blizzard IPs on the show. I'm happy to very, very lightly dabble on them if something newsworthy comes up. So thanks so much for being on the show, mate.
Yep. Have a good one.
Hi, everyone. Did you know that the vast majority of callers that you hear on Countdown to Classic are residents of the Countdown to Classic Discord? Please do come and check us out. Outside of that, if you want to hear more from me, then follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2. I've also started streaming regularly, and you can find me on Twitch at Countdown to Classic. So please do come hang out and have some fun over there. If you want to call into the show, give feedback, or submit a memory lane or anger management of your own, then email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Now, let's get back to the show. And with all those calls now done, it's time for a hit of lore, as compiled and read from the always amazing Wowpedia website. In regular segment, That's Lore Like It. Lady Jaina Proudmoore is the daughter of Dalen and Catherine Proudmoore and sister of Derek and Tandred. She's considered one of the finest mages in all of Azeroth and the most powerful human sorceress alive. In vanilla World of Warcraft, she is the leader of Theramore. Trained as the personal agent of Archmage Antonidas, the late leader of the Kirin Tor and Dalaran, she was sent to investigate the plague of undeath with Prince Arthas Menethil, her childhood friend and one-time romantic interest. She witnessed the initial stages of the fall of Lordaeron during the Third War firsthand, and guided by a mysterious prophet, later revealed as Medivh, Jaina rallied what survivors she could find and fled across the sea to Kalimdor. There, her expedition forces joined together with the Night Elves and the New Horde, and defeated the Burning Legion during the Battle of Mount Hyjal. The human survivors then founded the port city of Theramore, joining the alliance led by Varian Rin, while maintaining peace with the Horde. So, that's just a hint, just a splash of Jaina. But how about we go all the way back and get to know who Jaina is as a person? But in order to do that, we need to hear a little bit about her father and also the Kirin Tor before getting to Jaina, as all of this stuff will be important later on in the story. And actually, that's a small lie. It's not a little bit, it's a lot. So buckle up, because here we go. Born 3 years prior to the First War, Jaina Proudmoore is the youngest child of Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, longtime friend and ally of Lordaeron and Stormwind. After the First War, Dalen Proudmoore was the leader of the island nation of Kulturas, which, depending on your pronunciation, now it's said Kultiras, but back in the day it used to be Kulturas. So let's go with the old school one. It's a maritime human settlement built on the island chain of the same name. When the people of Stormwind arrived up north and warned orcs would soon invade Lordaeron, he was among the human leaders summoned shortly before the Second War to an emergency meeting at capital city in Lordaeron by King Terenas Menethil II, where the Alliance of Lordaeron was formed. With his longtime friend Anduin Lothar at his side, with Lothar being the supreme commander of the armies of the Alliance of Lordaeron during the Second War, Proudmoore was given control of the Alliance Navy as Grand Admiral. As such, Kulturas funded much of the armada of the Alliance, and Proudmoore led the naval assault on the Orcs, seeking to engage their forces on land, sea, and air. Under the control of the new Grand Admiral, the Alliance Navy intercepted the Horde fleet near the island of Zuldare, before the Battle of Hillsbrad Foothills, one of the earliest battles of the Second War and the first major battle between the Orcish Horde and the Alliance of Lordaeron. Proudmoore's vessels finding the crude Horde ships was akin to a wolf crossing paths with an injured lamb. The Horde's lumbering ships were significantly outmatched by Proudmoore's forces, which hailed from his traditionally seafaring island nation. Proudmoore's seasoned maritime fleet was able to easily outmaneuver the less sea-experienced Orc navy sooner than he anticipated. Orcish ships were blown to pieces by Alliance cannon volleys, and the crews of sunken transports were swallowed by the waves. As dozens of transports sank, and countless Horde soldiers drowned, Admiral Proudmoore redoubled his efforts, realizing that the destruction of the entire Orc army was within his grasp. However, the Horde fleet was not alone. The Orcs had enslaved the Red Dragonflight by capturing the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza and forced her children to obey their commands under the threat of torturing their mother. Reluctantly following the Orcs from behind, 3 enslaved red dragons appeared after Proudmoore's navy attacked and bathed several of the Alliance vessels in fire. Though the dragons were few in number, Proudmoore had no means to combat them at the time and was forced to call a retreat. As the Alliance fleet scattered, the Horde ships continued their advance towards Lordaeron. Later in the war, after the Horde was completely driven from Lordaeron and Khazmodan was liberated, the Blacktooth Grin clan, an Orcish clan originally formed by Blackhand, the first war chief of the Old Horde, to serve as the scouting arm of the Blackrock clan, were travelling with the Horde fleet and had been sailing towards the Horde-controlled Stormwind. However, near the island of Crestfall, situated near and belonging to the Kingdom of Kulturas, the Alliance's navy finally overtook the Horde fleet. Admiral Proudmoore once more commanded his ships to strike at the lumbering Orc vessels, though this time his forces were supported by Wildhammer Dwarven Griffin Riders led by Kurdran Wildhammer, who we heard all about a few episodes ago on the show. The agile birds now had experience battling the Horde's red dragons and were able to skillfully outmaneuver their larger foes. Meanwhile, down below, the Alliance fleet virtually annihilated their enemies, blowing Horde ships apart with cannon fire and sending thousands to a watery grave. The Battle of Crestfall ended in a decisive Alliance victory, securing human naval supremacy against the Horde and preventing additional enemy reinforcements reaching safety. Without the dragons, the Horde fleet stood little chance and continued to suffer disastrous losses at the hands of the Alliance navy. The sea itself was painted red with the blood of the countless individuals who lost their lives in the struggle. Eventually, the vast majority of the Horde fleet was left in ruins at the bottom of the Great Sea by Proudmoore's superior forces. Only a handful of vessels escaped being sunk, including Dalrend and Maim's ship, the bloodthirsty Sons of Blackhand. In the skies, the dwarves' fearless efforts were enough to ultimately drive the dragon riders to flight, and they subsequently scattered in all directions. Among the losses suffered by Proudmoore's navy was the loss of the Third Fleet to the dragon riders of the Dragonmoor Orcs, taking with it Derek Proudmoore, eldest son of the Grand Admiral, who was killed in the dragon's flames, a loss that would forever haunt the commander. After the defeat of the Orcish navy, Proudmoore discovered a human in the wreckage he initially believed was a survivor from the Third Fleet, beginning to hope Derek survived as well, but soon discovered the man was from Alterac and had been part of a group sent by Aidan Perinold, the king of the human nation of Alterac, to guide and assist the Horde. Proudmoore had the man confined and soon found 3 more survivors with the same story that would be used as evidence of Perinold's betrayal of the Alliance. After the Second War, there was a meeting at Netherguard Keep in the Blasted Lands involving Dalen and other leaders of the Seven Kingdoms, the human states that became sovereign after the disintegration of the Empire of Arathor approximately 1200 years before the First War. Proudmoore discussed the rebuilding of Stormwind City with King of Stormwind Varian Rin and the Dark Portal with Khadgar, one of the most powerful magi in Azerothian history. He later informed the Alliance army of the Orcs' movements when they were searching for artifacts. Proudmoore stayed beside King Terenas Menethil, the King of Lordaeron and father of Arthas, through the political turmoil that followed the Second War. He quarrelled with Gen Greymane, King of Gilneas, at a meeting concerning the fate of Alterac before Lord Davil Presta, the human guise of Deathwing the Destroyer, a now evil and malevolent dragon aspect, diffused the situation. Later, Dalen was present in Stormwind when Arthas became a paladin. He was also one of the 4 jurors during the trial of Tyrion Fordring in Stratholme, who had shown mercy to the Orc Aetrig, which I believe we've heard about before as well on the show. Dalen Proudmoore remained a close ally of Lordaeron for many years. He was crushed and horrified to hear the news that Lordaeron was destroyed by the demonic invasion in the Third War. When he searched Lordaeron for survivors, he found nothing but legions of undead and demons, and few survivors. Proudmoore learned about the new horde stealing ships from Southshore, and he and his navy quickly tracked the Orcs to the open seas. But both fleets were hit by a storm that caused some of their ships to land on the Darkspear Islands. But we'll skip back to Jaina now after hearing a fair bit about her father, so let's get to the core character of this tale. When her magical talent was discovered after the Second War, Jaina's mother Catherine had to fight Dalen to allow Jaina to be taught at Dalaran, the focal point for magi and the study of the arcane throughout human history. Begrudgingly agreeing to the tutelage, Dalen agreed to have Jaina sent to Dalaran, where she badgered Archmage Antonidas, the leader of the Kirin Tor, into accepting her as an apprentice, eventually becoming one of the few female wizards in direct service to Dalaran. Under pressure by the expectations of her mentor, the heroic legacy she had to live up to, and the watchful eye of the citizenry of Lordaeron, Jaina struggled to keep her focus on her studies. So, who were the Kirin Tor that Jaina was now a part of? Well, the Kirin Tor, also known as the Wizard Council of Dalaran, or the Magus Senate of Dalaran, is an elite cadre of the most powerful wizards in the known world, and the ruling conclave of magi that leads the magical nation of Dalaran, one of the 7 human kingdoms. More specifically, they are governed by the Council of 6. The Kirin Tor were members of the original alliance of Lordaeron. They've also upheld an alliance with Silvermoon for over 2,000 years, and the Council of 6 itself once included Kel'Thas, Crown Prince Kalthus Sunstrider, and the Blood Elf Aethys Sunreaver. As Dalaran became the chief centre of learning for magicians throughout the land, its Magicrat lords formed the Kirin Tor as a specialised sect that was charged with cataloguing and researching every spell, artefact, and magic item known to mankind at the time. They are ruled by the Council of 6. The Council of 6, known as the Six as well, and the High Council or the Ruling Council, is the name given to the Kirin Tor High Council of Dalaran. These 6 individuals are the leaders of both the city and all territories under the control of Dalaran. The 6 are usually the most senior, but not necessarily the most gifted. They are chosen by several means, magical proficiency being but one of them. The council meets to discuss important issues and vote on matters. No single member holds sway, and the majority vote decides every issue. In case of a tie, the members reconvene a day later, during which interval each member considers his or her vote and all relevant information. They meet in the Chamber of Air, a room with no visible walls. The grey stone floor with its central diamond symbol stood beneath an open sky that shifted and changed rapidly, as if the time sped past within the chamber. Traditionally, the membership of the Council of 6 was kept a strict secret. When someone met with the council officially, it was always in a special enchanted chamber, the Chamber of Air, and the 6 would be disguised to keep their identity a secret. Of course, in a city populated by magi, such efforts were not always successful. Following the fall of Stormwind to the Orcish Horde, the Kirin Tor pledged the support of Dalaran to the newly formed Alliance of Lordaeron. Archmage Khadgar, who hoped to drive the politics out of the Kirin Tor and had been known to clash with the more partisan members of the council, personally served as their liaison and would eventually destroy the Dark Portal. Though the Dark Portal was destroyed in the aftermath of the Second War, the Kirin Tor noticed that a rift remained that connected Azeroth and Draenor together, and so created Netherguard Keep, a Dalaranian fortress of mages and paladins built to keep watch over the rift. Additionally, it took several members of the Kirin Tor working together in order to halt the taint that was spreading from the rift's location. During the war that would follow between the Alliance of Lordaeron and the Horde of Draenor, Tyron Gorfiend and his Death Knights, aided by Deathwing, found themselves able to successfully enter Dalaran's arcane vault and steal the Eye of Dalaran from the Kirin Tor. Archmage Antonidas would quickly inform Khadgar of the theft, and sometime after, the Alliance expedition would journey to Draenor in order to put an end to the Orcish threat. Following the destruction of Draenor, the Kirin Tor would take an interest in the defeated Orcs' strange lethargy. The organization would discover Orcs were suffering from a withdrawal of the demonic energies that they had become addicted to. So that's a bit of the background there for you. Now let's once again get a bit more into Jaina's personal history once she joined the Kirin Tor. Because of their mutually noble heritage, it was inevitable that Jaina and Prince Arthas, the heir to the throne of Lordaeron, would meet. The first time this happened was in the Cathedral of Capital City, wherein Arthas thought of her as someone who looked well accustomed to riding and hiking, and spent a great deal of time outdoors, and would not mind having a snowball pelted in her face or going for a swim on a hot day. Over the years, they grew close as friends, and then romantic ties eventually formed. Kael'thas Sunstrider, the Prince of Kel'Thalas, as well as a senior member of the Kirin Tor, was also fond of Jaina. Kael'thas fell in love with her during Jaina's training with Antonidas, but their differences in their age, she being a teenager and he being several centuries older, filled him with guilt and self-doubt, and resulted in only an awkward friendship between the two. As Jaina remained either unaware of Kael'thas's feelings or simply choosing not to return them, she effectively chose to romantically pursue Arthas. Once, when Arthas volunteered to escort Jaina to Dalaran, he took her out to see a camp where the Alliance kept the Orcs captured. This was the first real adventure they had together. They were very much in love with one another and were actually engaged to be married. But eventually, Arthas would question whether the two of them were ready to be together. Arthas would abruptly end the relationship so Jaina could focus on her magical studies in Dalaran, and Arthas could focus on his commitments to Lordaeron. Jaina was very hurt by the decision, but didn't fight him on it. She would soon realize and agree that it was the right thing to do at the time. Shortly after, they decided to rekindle their romance, but this was during the beginning of the Scourge invasion that would change both of their lives forever. So, let's get to those events of Warcraft 3 and Jaina's involvement. Archmage Antonidas' health was failing, which prohibited him from spending too much time away from his beloved city of Dalaran. Jaina, his apprentice, served as his eyes and ears in the world. Antonidas drummed into her not to be arrogant and told her the stories about Medivh and Aegwynn. Antonidas looked forward to the day when he would hand his power and mantle of leadership over to Jaina, who he felt would make a most impressive archmage. Eager to learn more about a plague sweeping northern Lordaeron, Antonidas was met one day by the Prophet, a mysterious being who transformed from human form to that of a raven. The Prophet pleaded with the wizard to take his people west to Kalimdor. Cautious with age, Antonidas dismissed the Prophet as nothing more than a madman, but Jaina, who had been watching in hiding, sensed great power in the Prophet and thought that perhaps they should heed his warnings. Antonidas continued to disagree and instead sent Jaina to meet with Arthas and investigate the plague at the northern village of Brill. As they investigated Brill, Jaina saw some very strange things, including a necromancer and a zombie made of various parts of several corpses. They faced off against several undead enemies and came upon a granary which contained grain infested with the plague. The crates bore the seal of Andorhal, the primary distributor of grain throughout Lordaeron. Chasing the necromancer, who was actually Kel'Thuzad, formerly a member of the Kirin Tor, who we've heard all about before on the show, to Andorhal, they found a mass of undead warriors waiting for them, but fought their way through to Kel'Thuzad, where Arthas killed him. Jaina and Arthas made their way back to central Lordaeron, and they stopped for rest at the small town of Hearthglen. When they arrived, they discovered that the plague-infected grain from Andorhal had arrived and had been distributed amongst the townfolk. They were transforming into the undead. Jaina reluctantly, but hastily left to find Uther the Lightbringer for reinforcements. She teleported back to Dalaran, where Antonidas sent for Uther, the famous paladin and Knight of the Silver Hand. When she returned with the Silver Hand at her back, Hearthglen was all but destroyed, and Arthas was fighting a losing battle. With Uther's help, though, they managed to push back the undead attackers. Arthas, demoralized and horrified by overwhelming forces of undead, vowed to go to Stratholme, where he hoped to fight Mal'Ganis. Jaina and Uther followed him to Stratholme, but didn't arrive in time to stop the townspeople from eating the tainted grain. All three knew that the people of Stratholme would soon become undead and attack them. Arthas was in favour of slaughtering the people before their transformation to purge the town, but Uther could not condone murdering helpless people whose only crime was being infected, even if leaving them alive meant that they would soon become a threat. When Uther refused to kill the civilians as Arthas ordered, Arthas renounced him, accusing him of treason. He demanded that any true to the king stay with him and see to the town's destruction. Jaina turned and followed Uther, to Arthas's surprise. Jaina and Uther returned to Stratholme's burning ruins after Arthas had finished with it. Both were appalled at what they saw. Jaina was visited by the mysterious prophet, who had previously attempted to reason with both King Terenas and her mentor Antonidas. The prophet sensed her leadership abilities and urged her to take the people that she could with her to the west, fleeing Lordaeron and her home country of Kul'Tiras. Many months later, Antonidas continued to study the plague from afar until finally it came to his doorstep. Arthas and the Scourge began their invasion of Dalaran. It was at this moment Jaina and Antonidas realized that the prophet had been right. Antonidas encouraged Jaina to take as many survivors of Lordaeron that she could and sail west for Kalimdor. Jaina decided to follow his words and made preparations. Though she offered to help her mentor and the Magi of Dalaran defend the city against the Scourge, Antonidas insisted that she tend to her other duties and lead what remained of her people across the Great Sea. At some point before leaving, but after the fall of Kel'Thalas, she tried to console Kael, who was saddened by his father's death. Yet Kael angrily rejected her consolation and rebuked her for favouring such a monster, being Arthas, over him. Before leaving, Jaina witnessed Arthas's army approaching Dalaran and wanted to confront him personally, but faltered in doing so after recalling her previous failed attempts to sway him. To this day, Jaina is still haunted by Arthas's descent to darkness, thinking it was her fault. Archmage Antonidas knew that it was too late for him to leave for Kalimdor with Jaina. As the leader of the Kirin Tor, he had to stay and protect Dalaran. The Scourge, led by Arthas, who was now a Death Knight, and Kel'Thuzad, now a Lich, had come to claim the Book of Medivh, a spellbook written by Medivh stored in a vault in the city. While Antonidas did his best to protect Dalaran, creating a protective field around the entire city that would inflict heavy injury upon any undead creature that entered it, it wasn't enough. Arthas led his undead minions into Dalaran and then into the Violet Citadel itself, where Arthas murdered Antonidas and claimed Medivh's spellbook. Arthas noticed that the book had Antonidas's blood on it and wondered if that would make it more potent. Although the forces of Dalaran fought on desperately, Kel'Thuzad used the spellbook to summon the demon lord Archimonde. Moments later, Archimonde crushed the city of Dalaran into rubble. Antonidas' spirit lingered for some time after the city's destruction, continuing to fight what he believed to be the invading undead forces. When Prince Caelthus eventually fled the dungeons of the city, he found the ghosts of Antonidas and several of his kindred and finally released them, allowing them peace after so many months. Upon arriving on Kalimdor, Jaina found that there were orcs there. Believing the Ord to have followed them from Lordaeron, Jaina clashed with the troops of Grom Hellscream. Afterwards, Jaina set out to find the Prophet. Not only was Stone Talon Peak a good defense, but also she sensed a great power within it. Jaina led a small expedition into the mountain with the hopes of finding some power that could help her defeat the orcs. But she sensed that they were being followed. Upon breaching the core of the mountain, Jaina stumbled upon Thrall and Can Bloodhoof as well. They were about to battle when they were all suddenly confronted by the Oracle, who was actually the Prophet Medivh, who they had met in Lordaeron. The Prophet implored them all to ally with each other, saying that they would not survive alone against the might of the Burning Legion. Reluctantly, Jaina agreed to ally her forces with Thralls against Hellscream and an army of Chaos Orcs and demons. Jaina gave him a soul gem, which he used to capture Grom's essence as the invasion of Kalimdor began. Then, she helped him purge Grom of the demonic curse that had gripped him. Jaina and Thrall continued as allies, although their forces were not very eager about it, even after Hellscream's death. They were terrorized by the undead, but also by the Night Elves' deadly hit-and-run tactics. Though their alliance with one another kept them alive, they were only holding on by a thread. Finally, Thrall received a vision. Jaina followed him to where he was instructed to go, where they found the leaders of the Night Elves, Malfurion Stormrage and Tyrande Whisperwind. The Prophet appeared and revealed himself to be none other than Medivh, who had returned to correct his mistakes of the past. He implored the humans, orcs, and night elves to all join forces against the Legion, or they would all fall alone. They all agreed to defend Mount Hyjal together. Jaina used her teleportation spells to scout out the surrounding area, and found that Archimonde and his Doomguard were quickly making their way up the mountain. The defenders instituted 3 bases going up the mountain in an effort to halt his ascent. Jaina's base was the first in Archimonde's path, and so it was the first to go. But before he could kill her, Jaina spirited herself out of Archimonde's clutches. The next base to go was Thrall's, and Jaina used her remaining energy to teleport Thrall from his base before Archimonde destroyed him, so that they could live to fight another day. Following the Legion's defeat on Mount Hyjal, Jaina took her refugees to an island outpost off the eastern coast of Kalimdor, newly named Theramore. After Jaina and Thrall's armies were forced to work together after the meeting with Medivh, the two leaders soon became good friends. Thrall once stated that Jaina reminded him strongly of Taretha Foxton, a close personal friend of Thrall's during his early life as a slave, which we've heard about before on the show. However, Jaina herself made no specific reason for her to trust Thrall. Their friendship was nonetheless strong. Sometime after this victory over the Legion, Jaina's father Dalen returned to Kul'Tiras and, taking a large part of the Kul'Tiras fleet, sailed across the Great Sea to Kalimdor in order to search for his daughter and the survivors that fled there after Lordaeron fell to the Scourge. Though Jaina Proudmoore had managed to earn War Chief Thrall's trust, Dalen felt that he had to crush the Horde before they gained a foothold in Kalimdor. While Proudmoore headed towards land, he ordered Lieutenant Alvarold to take an exploratory fleet and scout out the coasts of Kalimdor, while Lieutenant Benedict was to wait and lead a second wave to Durotar. At the same time, Rexxar, a half-ogre, half-orc beastmaster of the Mok'Nathal clan, visited Jaina at Theramore and demanded an explanation of a human encroachment on the fledgling land of Durotar and an assassination attempt of what was supposed to be Thrall, undertaken by Dalen Proudmoore's exploratory fleet. Jaina stated that she had no idea of any human force that had wanted to attack Thrall, and she certainly had given no such order. When Jaina agreed to help Rexxar investigate, they discovered the outpost where Rexxar had come from was under attack from Naga. After clearing the area, Jaina came across a single dying Marine who, with his last breath, had Jaina realize with horror that the Marine had been sent by her father as part of an expedition to find her. While this was going on, Dalen had begun raiding the nearby coast and assaulting Orcish settlements, but when they began to fight back, he withdrew and retreated to the island citadel of Proudmoore. When he arrived, he was overjoyed to find Jaina alive, but found her keeping some strange company. Rexar the Moknathol, Rokan the Darkspear Troll Shadowhunter, and Chen Stormstout the Pandaren Brewmaster, all of them allies of the Horde that were with her. Dalen immediately demanded that they all be arrested, but Jaina retreated and helped Rexar and his friends escape. Unwilling to allow Jaina any explanation, Dalen usurped control over Proudmoore and used it as the staging ground for his newest campaign to have his vengeance on the Orcs. But he was beaten back by their numerous allies and was forced to retreat back to Proudmoore, where he established a naval blockade around the island to prevent the Horde from launching a counterattack. What the Admiral didn't count on, though, was his own daughter siding against him. Jaina realized that her father was trapped in the past and that his vendetta against the Orcs would only lead to more needless death and destruction for both sides. Jaina was in despair. While she felt loyalty to her father and her nation, her experience with the Scourge and the Legion convinced her that vendettas such as her father's were immaterial in the grand scheme of things. Jaina helped the Horde obtain ships from the Goblins and ordered her own troops to stand down when the Horde assaulted Proudmoore. The Horde then laid siege to Proudmoore, with Jaina aiding in destroying Dalen's ships. The Horde battled their way to Dalen's Keep, where Rexar squared off against the Admiral himself. Thrall tried to reason with Admiral Proudmoore, telling him that the Horde was no longer the same enemy that he had fought so many years ago, but Dalen refused to believe that the Orcs could ever change, and launched himself into battle. After an arduous fight, Dalen Proudmoore, victim of his own hatred, was slain in battle. With his death, the battle ceased. Jaina knelt at the body of her prideful father and mournfully asked why he didn't listen, her last words to him. Rexar told Jaina to remember her father for the proud warrior he was. When the people of Kulturas learned of their Lord Admiral's death, they cried out for vengeance, but the other nations of the Alliance were not interested. Ordeals caused by the plague in Lordaeron were more immediate concerns, and the other allied leaders also had little pity for Dalen's own aggressive actions. The people of Kulturas furiously isolated themselves from the rest of the Alliance, but were not angry with all of the Alliance leaders. They instead nursed a bitter hatred only towards Jaina for betraying her family. Dalen's wife, Catherine, would succeed him as Lord Admiral of Kulturas. Jaina is one of the most inquisitive and talented sorcerers in Azeroth to this day. With her power and intellect, many survivors of Lordaeron looked to her leadership to thrive in the foreign lands of their nation in Theramore Isle, while other leaders of the Alliance appreciated her wisdom in their faction's affairs. Although she was originally wary of the Orcs, she later fought and advocated for peace and moderation between the Alliance and the Horde. Even so, old hatreds or manipulation from nefarious agents have constantly undermined her efforts to promote diplomacy between the rival factions. Jaina has gone to great lengths to appease the costs of peace. She even attempted to sway King Varian Rin, once he was restored to power, to establish more formal diplomatic ties with the Horde, though Varian felt that the Horde cannot be trusted. Though political tensions continued to escalate between her faction and the Horde, Jaina continued to communicate with Thrall and other Horde leaders through back channels. So that's Jaina's story out of the way. So what I figured I'd do now is just give you a few tidbits of information, little things that you might not have already known about Jaina. So here's a fair few of them, one after the other. We'll whiz through it in about 2 minutes. The Kultiran song, Daughter of the Sea, that we saw recently released by Blizzard just before BlizzCon, tells the story of Jaina's involvement in Dalen's demise. According to the folk song, it was Dalen himself who, with his dying breath, first called her Daughter of the Sea. While the moniker did come from her father, it actually appears to be a childhood name given to her in endearment rather than one given on his death. Her private vessel was the Wave Cutter. Jaina does not share the same accent as the rest of the Kultiran, including her family. This is mentioned in one of her on-click voice lines in Battle for Azeroth, saying, "Funny, I never even realized that I'd lost my Kultiran accent." Next, Jaina was born 3 years before the First War, making her 28 years old by the time of the events of World of Warcraft. In Twilight of the Aspects, an alternate timeline was shown that Arthas, along with Jaina, were forced from Lordaeron to Stormwind. It was then said that they had a son named Uther Menethil, which seems to prove that if Arthas had never fallen into madness, Jaina would have remained by his side. Next up, Jaina referred to her father as Papa. He taught her that it was as much of a mistake to underestimate yourself as to overestimate yourself, and that false modesty is as bad as false pride. On the other hand, Jaina's mother, Catherine, feels that she forgot to teach Jaina humility or loyalty to her people. Lady Jaina Proudmoore is a skilled practitioner of transmutation magic. She has developed a powerful variation of the popular mass teleport spell that is capable of moving a significant percentage of her army with minimal effort. This spell helps make her extremely unpredictable on the battlefield. Jaina currently carries, and I'm not sure if this is vanilla or in later expansions, but it might be in vanilla, apparently currently carries the Staff of Antonidas, which is a gift from her late mentor. Jaina was planned to die as part of a main story element in an early draft for Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos. Quite early on, actually, in the Cult of the Damned mission, but that idea was scrapped as Arthas didn't need any more motivation to chase after Mal'Ganis than he already had. The love story between Jaina and Arthas was also planned to appear in the game, and Jaina may have also been planned to have become a Banshee, but it was all scrapped as it was too similar to the story of Jim Raynor and Sarah Kerrigan from StarCraft. The Banshee plotline was instead moved to Sylvanas Windrunner. In Christie Golden's novel, Rise of the Lich King, it's implied that Jaina had sexual relations with Arthas during Hallow's End and a few days before the culling of Stratholme. Jaina is supposedly still wearing the clothes that she wore in Warcraft 3 in World of Warcraft, except for the hood and the cape. In The Frozen Halls, Jaina refers to Frostmourne as the blade that destroyed our kingdom. This could suggest that she thought of Lordaeron as her kingdom, or of herself as a child of Lordaeron, possibly due to her relationship with Arthas and her involvement in many of Lordaeron's matters. Next, Jaina hasn't contacted Kultiras since the aftermath of the Third War. Also, Jaina considers Anduin to be like a nephew to her. And finally, Jaina's drastic personality change over the course of several expansions gave rise to the largely tongue-in-cheek theory that she is, or was at one point, replaced with one of the Nathrazim, or the Dreadlords. Jesse Cox popularized this theory at various BlizzCons and his YouTube series, sparking a lot of ironic and some earnest support for it within the community. Evidence ranging from her frequent changes in attitude to plot-convenient inconsistencies with her magical power, some cases as far back as Wrath of the Lich King, have been cited as proof that she is a subversive force in the Alliance. The Jaina is a Dreadlord theory has even received nods from Blizzard. In World of Warcraft Chronicle Volume 2, it redirects readers to Jaina Proudmoore if they look up Dreadlord in the index. When outright asked if Jaina is a Dreadlord, however, Alex Afrasiabi confirmed that she's not. In August of 2017, Blizzard announced that Jaina in Heroes of the Storm would receive a Dreadlord skin as part of a then-upcoming Call of Kel'Thuzad event. This prompted Ian Hazzikostas to again confirm in an interview that Jaina is not a Dreadlord, stating that Heroes of the Storm is not considered canonical, and that the skin is simply paying homage to a community meme. So, that's everything for the lore. Now, with all of that out of the way, and as the episode rounds into the home stretch, I wanted to briefly hit on one topic that we haven't touched on yet in the show that is considerably timely given where we are in the year, and that's the Feast of Winter Veil. And it should be noted that if Blizzard do presumably include the Feast of Winter Veil in Classic, I mean, I hadn't really considered it hitting the cutting room floor, but who knows. By the time that the game launches, the event actually won't be that far away. Perhaps if they do more of a sort of late Augusty release, who knows? But perhaps it could only be 4 to 5 months worth of waiting, depending on exactly when we get Classic. Still got my fingers crossed for June 4. But anyway, let's very quickly cover the Feast of Winter Veil. The Feast of Winter Veil, also called the Feast of Great Winter or simply Winter Veil or Winter's Veil, is an in-game end-of-year, several-week-long holiday event seeming to be the in-game counterpart of Christmas and other holidays at the end of the year. It was added in patch 1.2 of the game on the 18th of December in 2004, a mere 6 or 7 weeks after the release of World of Warcraft. So, what is the event? Well, ever consumed with the research of their origins, the dwarves choose to celebrate the season as a recognition of Great Father Winter himself. They consider him to be the personification of one of the ancients of Azeroth, the Titans. Much as they claim lineage in one degree or another to these mystical beings, they consider their snowy home of Dun Morogh as the prime example of Great Father Winter's blessing. And yes, I've gone back to Dun Morogh. I chop and change between Dun and Dune. I know it should be Dune, but nah, write me an angry letter. The holiday was introduced to the Alliance at large by Muradin Bronzebeard. The Tauren and their shamanistic understanding of winter, along with their recent emergence into druidic endeavours, fit in well with the legend of Winter Veil. Many Tauren choose this time as the right time to give thanks for the blessings of their new home in Mulgore. So that's the short lore of the Feast of Winter Veil, but just to flesh this one out just a little bit more, I found this article from Engadget.com titled The Crashin' Thrashin' History of Winter Veil, which I recommend you go read if you want a bit more information. But here's a quote from a couple of paragraphs over there. And they say, given how early this holiday was added to the game, it's not surprising that there wasn't much to it compared to today. The holiday came with a few quests, including the original short Grinch quest line, not to be confused with the Grinch, of course. The first few days of the holiday saw a swarm of activity in Hillsbrad. The Tarren Mill versus South Shore battles moved a few leagues north as players battled friend and foe alike to tag the Grinch and get quest credit. Completing the quest line awarded you with one of several crafting recipes, such as Gloves of the Great Father, the Winter's Might enchantment, or the coveted Snowmaster 9000 schematic. The event also added vendors with a few holiday-themed items and recipes for cookies and eggnog. Of course, the cities were decorated for the holidays as well, and Great Father Winter made an appearance. But you and I know that's all well and good during winter in Vanilla WoW, but there was one thing that the season was renowned for. Hardcore balls to the face. Snowballs, that is. Come on, get your mind out of the gutter. Here we go. So, snowballs, if you remember, had a bit of a quirk back then. They had a knockback effect that players had a lot of fun with. And the use of that knockback was extended to a few different areas. I thought it would be fun just to quickly run through some players' memories of using snowballs back in the day. So, here we go real quick, starting with user The Colburn over at the WoW subreddit. We accidentally discovered something about vanilla snowballs in a snowball battle. If you got on the deep run tram in a car or two behind a stranger, target them, and as soon as the tram takes off, spam the hell out of your snowballs at them. The tram runs at a very slightly faster speed than your snowballs, so your snowballs, all of them, hover right behind the tram the whole way. When the stranger gets off the tram, the snowballs all catch up at once. Bam, 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 solidly stunning him off his feet for at least a minute or two while you and your friends roll on the floor. Also, if you got up on the upper porch of the building closest to the Ironforge bird taxi, target people talking to the NPC and cut loose with a snowball right as they go into flight. The snowball would catch up with them no matter where in the world they flew, as soon as they dismounted. Bam! Timing on that one with getting them as they mounted was a bit tough, but hilarious to do to friends, especially if they were on vent. And that was snowballs back when WoW was more fun. And next we've got this from a deleted user regarding AV. Horde towers were easier to defend with snowballs though. It was possible to knock people out of bunkers, but it took more effort than simply standing by a tower flag and hitting anyone who tried to come through the door with a snowball. Getting across the bridge was fairly easy. If they stand in the middle of the bridge, just come straight at them and they can't do much. If they're off to one side, hit them with a snowball first to knock them off. Next we have this one from Dex Rogue. An Alliance rogue stealthed on the bridge with these snowballs, punting Alliance and Horde off. Hilarious. There was so much rage that they hotfixed it so you couldn't use them on your own faction. Either way, as much as others hated it, I freaking loved doing it to people. Next there's this one from Genesis 88. My favourite thing was sitting atop the hill across from the high road to Stormpike Graveyard as Horde, and when another player came up, I'd stand right next to them, seeming all innocent. Then I'd hit them with the snowball, and they'd go flying off the hill. I was so sad when they took that out of the game. Next we have this one from Rankin Base. Blasting Horde out of Alliance towers was pretty fun too. Think you're going to cap that? Think again. Next we have this one from user Tharukal, who says this. Best use for snowballs is still the Undercity elevator. The stun got you stuck in the air at the top and you would fall to your death once the stun wore off. My friend never went on the elevator with me again. Next there's this one from Hoboto. I had a character with all 16 slots in all of my bags full of just snowballs. And finally this one from Squirrel Man over at Wowhead, who says this. It's so much fun to save 100 or 2 for the middle of summer. I just put them in the bank, then attack people with them. It's so funny to watch their expression. And with all that done, finally, I thought it would be a bit of fun in this holiday season to wind up this wintry chat with a poem or limerick that I found from user Piranor over at Wowhead, based on The Night Before Christmas. Now, it's a bit of a long one, but it's some good dumb fun, so listen up to this one over the next few minutes. Now, not every line of this rhymes, but stick with it. It's, like I said, it's a good effort. So here we go. 'Twas the eve before Wintervale when all across Azeroth not one mob was stirring, not even a crimson moth. The axes and guns by the stove stack were hung, in delight that old Great Father soon would be there. The Orklings and Trollkin were snug in their beds, while nightmares of Deathwing danced in their heads, and Mama in her plate mail and I in my cloth had just started digging in for some Alterac wrath. When deep within the drag there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the auction house to see what was the matter. Gemming my epics, I flew like a mage, slashed open the shutters and threw up in rage. A loon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of Eversong to objects below, when what to my bloodshot eyes should appear but a battle-scarred sleigh and 8 ragged reindeer. With a cold as ice driver, not some Alliance bobber, but I knew in that moment it must be Great Father. More rapid than wind riders his coursers they came, and he screamed and bellowed and belittled them by name. Now Dig Snout, now Drim Snap, now Protspec and Vexer, on Contagion, on Hamstring, on Drago and Metzen, to the top of Darnassus, to the bottom of the Forge. Now rend the Alliance, rend away all. As priests that before Al Akir fly, when they meet with a windburst, mount to the sky. So up to the twin colossi the festive mounts flew, when a sleigh full of smoky wood treats feats of strength and the Great Father too. And then with a shout I heard on the roof the tearing and rending of each razor-sharp hoof. As I drew on my helm and was turning around, through the roof Great Father came with a bound, dressed in festive leathers from his head to his foot, and his wraps were all stained with blood and charred soot. A bundle of sausage and cheese he had flung on his back, just like a wretched goblin just opening his pack. His nostrils how they flared, his tusks how rotten, his cheeks were like moss, his nose like Orgrotten. His drooling wide mouth twisted with orcish brogue, the grizzled beard of his chin sickly pale like the snow. The stump of a gnome he held tight in his maw, the blood dripping down like a wound from Calder's bone saw. He had a smashed face and a tiny goblin flunky that cowered when he barked like a bowl full of jelly. He was gnarled and bent, a right hostile old orc, and I grimaced when I saw him, in spite of myself. A glare of his eye and a crack of his neck soon gave me to know he meant no disrespect. He spoke not a word but went straight to his work, and filled all the sabatons, then turned with a jerk, and laying his fist hard astride of his chest, and with a Loktar he departed with the rest. He rushed to his sleigh, to his team gave a roar, and away they all flew in a mist of red gore. But I heard him exclaim with one exultant breath, "Happy winter veil to the Horde, and to the Alliance a slow death." Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from Piranor. So that was a bit of fun. I hope you all enjoyed that. That's it for the Feast of Winter Veil. If you have a fun story involving snowballs to the face or anything from the Feast of Winter Veil for that matter, then please don't be shy in reaching out to me for a call or a story, and I'll tell it for you. I'd love to hear it. But with that, now it's time for anger management. In anger management, I bring you some of the listeners' angriest thoughts about vanilla World of Warcraft. And today, I'm going to start off with listener Axtel, who tells us this. I got a recent one for you, Josh. While leveling my ult in Battle for Azeroth, I joined a queue to heal a random dungeon. I get in the dungeon and they're 80% done. I ask, what happened to the last guy? I'm usually curious as to what happens to people when they leave that close to finishing a dungeon. Nobody said a word to me. They weren't bad at all, easy to heal and a good group. I just kept my mouth shut and kept going. Anyways, a few mobs before the last boss, a vote kick prompt comes up to kick one of the DPS. Keep in mind, not a word has been said in chat the entire time that I've been in the party. Nobody complaining or fighting, etc. I hit no to the vote to kick on the DPS. We start the fight on the last boss and the boss had maybe 10% health left. I suddenly go to a load screen. The random group of silent assholes vote kicked me with essentially 10 seconds left. I ended up getting no loot and none of the incentive experience for running a random dungeon. Essentially, it was a waste of my time. Worst part is there is nothing I could do about it other than just accept it and move on. Literally, in 14 years of playing World of Warcraft, I've never had something like that happen to me. I guess it was bound to happen eventually, but damn, I was so disappointed. And next we have this one from listener Minoru, who tells us this. One thing Blizzard ruined in vanilla was changing Rogue's detect traps from an active ability to a passive one in patch 1.11. Before the patch, Rogues couldn't detect traps any better than other players unless they used this ability. Upon activation, a glowing, sparkling ball would swirl around the Rogue, and then they'd be able to see traps from farther away for a short time. To be honest, there weren't many traps to be detected at all in World of Warcraft. Its best usage was in PvP against hunters. The ability was almost worthless as an active, so Blizzard changed it to be a passive ability. Sounds like not a big deal, right? Wrong! Rogues loved the active detect traps. The activation effect, lovingly dubbed Swirly Ball, was flashy and fun to use. It didn't cost energy, didn't break stealth, and could be used while mounted or during emotes. The result? Many rogues used it non-stop, whether as a stylistic flourish during battle or as a cure for boredom during downtime. Detect traps was there for them. To many, Blizzard taking their beloved swirly ball away was to take away a part of their class kit. To make it worse, Blizzard also nerfed the trap detection range, making it objectively worse than before. Before the patch, rogues who ignored to detect traps would be taught an important lesson during the class-specific level 24 quest involving Ravenholt Manor. You're meant to journey there to complete your Rite of Cunning. In the quest description, you're only given the vague instructions that your cunning will be tested. It should be noted that you learn to detect traps at the same level, 24. On the way to the manor, there's a cave with a chest in it. The chest says, open to pass your rite. If you're wary enough to use detect traps, a glowing blue gem appears that says, danger, do not open, move along. If you touch that chest, Milton, an elite level 33, will spawn in to kill you. Move forward through the cave to find Ravenholt Manor, where you'll complete the quest. The man there asks, did you meet Milton? And laughs. The Rite of Cunning loses its magic with detect traps as a passive. You just see it as a trap as you approach, unless you neglected to train detect traps altogether. Your cunning is no longer tested. I realise it's just a casualty of a larger scale change, but I really like the extra thought put into this quest, and the cleverness expected from the player. Now it's gone, and it will remain that way for Classic. I feel bad for every rogue who never got to experience the joy of Swirly Ball. The next one is from Andrew L., who says this. I have continuously seen posts on the forums from long-time private server players saying they are the reason that WoW Classic is happening because they campaigned and fought for it for 7+ years. Sometimes they go on to say that people who weren't involved in this, or retail players, shouldn't fucking be allowed to have opinions on the development of WoW Classic. This is complete bullshit for one simple fact. While all of you were campaigning and fighting Blizzard, the folks that stayed with them through the rough times and continued to support the company financially are why they are in a position today to recreate this game. If Blizzard didn't get as big as they've become, you wouldn't be getting your precious. As much as you non-retail players might not like to hear it, retail players have a big part in why this game is happening. Arguably, just as much as some of the elitists that fought in the trenches for this game to happen. We all want this game, so stop acting entitled. That shit won't fly when the game gets released if you want to live in an environment that depends on social interaction. And with all that anger out of the system, now it's time to mellow out a bit with a bunch of stories from the listeners in Memory Lane. In Memory Lane, we hear the listeners' fondest or funniest stories from their days in classic World of Warcraft, or in World of Warcraft in general. Screw it, I'll accept anything. And we start with listener Toll, who tells us this. I was reading the chats in class discussions, Warrior, and it spurred a memory about my guild Pandemonium, later merging into the larger guild Rival on the private server Project Azeroth. Being on a smaller server but still wanting to raid meant that we had all kinds of time zones to worry about. Unfortunately for the North American players, there was a slightly higher density of European players, with a large proportion of the officers being European, so it was up to us to compromise for the raid schedule. Because the organisation was lackluster at the time, I had yet to become an officer, it seemed like a player was leaving the guild every night over this, and the loot distribution debacles putting a little bit of added stress on everyone. In the end, I became the advocate for unheard North American players in the guild because I suppose I was loud and obnoxious enough to be difficult to ignore. It was like a good old custody battle, but instead of fighting over little Jimmy, we were duking it out over having the right to raid at a decent time. Oh, you wouldn't believe the chat logs, packed with whispers. In the end, we worked it out so that North Americans started at about 1 p.m. and Europeans started at about 6 p.m, only Saturdays and Sundays. Just another tribulation that Rival eventually overcame that led to the badass success story. Next we have this one from listener Eniri, who tells us this. Someone on my server in vanilla, up to Wrath I think, had an auction house alt called Tiny Baby. He was infamous for keeping items on the auction house for inflated amounts of gold for long periods of time. That bank alt name became filler in trade chat for anything. Who's the best mage on the server? Tiny Baby. Where's Mancrick's wife? Check Tiny Baby's room. Or Tiny Baby is X, Tiny Baby is Y, etc., etc. Tiny Baby never talked to anyone. He was just a bank/auction alt. That just fueled the infamy. Next we have this one from listener Nils a lot, who tells us this. So this is from 2007, around when BC had been out for a few weeks. So this isn't really vanilla, but hopefully this will still go through. Spoiler alert, it did, Nils a lot. I was 9 and my parents didn't want to play monthly for retail, so I was stuck with my friends on private servers. We played on high XP rate servers, so it wasn't until the middle of Cataclysm when I created my first and current retail account that I realized that it was pretty much mandatory to quest in order to level. On the private servers, you only had to kill mobs, and some private servers even offered a custom leveling road that were filled with mobs for you to kill to level up. So I was killing mobs in Hellfire Peninsula one day and came across a goblin that was stuck in a cage. I right-clicked on the cage and the door opened. The goblin was free, but it didn't move. I was confused and wondered why the goblin didn't move out of the cage since it was now wide open. I tried clicking on him and his usual dialogue played. You know, the "What's up?" The goblin had the light goblin voice that says the quotes a little quicker than the other goblin voices. Me being 9 and not that good at English yet, thought the goblin voice sounded really cocky. I clicked on him again and he said, "Yo!" which didn't sound any less cocky. I was like, "Come on man, I just freed you from that tiny cage and now you're gonna give me attitude?" After that, I left the goblin and continued my mob slaughtering. The next day at school, I told my friends about my encounter, and they laughed and talked some sense into me. Man, I miss Burning Crusade. Next we have this one from listener Nostalgia Dad, who says this. When I transferred to Collect Goss at the end of Vanilla, there was a guy on Horde side named Scared Boy who was a total meme, and he was legitimately awful at WoW. Whenever anyone asked a question in chat, people would blame him. Anytime someone would ask where Mancrick's wife was or how to do something, people would PM the asker and tell them to ask Scared Boy. When someone would ninja loot or screw up and wipe the raid, everyone would jokingly blame Scared Boy, both in chat and on the forums. When Burning Crusade dropped, he was the talk of Hellfire Peninsula. The entire server ripped on him for several days. I never grouped with him before this, and so I truly felt kind of bad about how he was treated. Until I grouped with him for a run through Ramparts. And he was truly awful. We wiped half a dozen times before we finally kicked him and filled the spot with someone less terrible. From then on, I added him to my friends list and had my guild all do the same. Whenever he would log on, we would announce he was online. Not even talk trash really, just announce he was playing. The server knew better at this point anyways. He must have transferred his tune to another server about a week later because he wasn't listed in the armory anymore. I always wonder what happened to him. Sometime later, when I was in a different guild, shout out to all my old guildies with It Was Lag, we would occasionally wipe and blame him. Guess old memes die hard. Next we have this one from listener Bazell. So early on when meters were a thing and Molten Core was relevant content, our paladins kept thinking they were shit hot because of how high on the meters they were, and they wouldn't let anyone forget about it. So the next raid, I said, fuck this, and I asked a mage for like 200 waters and constantly spammed Prayer of Healing the entire 3 to 4 hour raid. I ended up with about 40% of the entire raid's healing at the end of the night, obviously blowing the paladins out of the water. They were pissed, but they never said a word about healing meters again after that raid. Next, we have this one from listener Crackerman, who tells us this. Back in original vanilla World of Warcraft, I played an undead rogue, and world PvP was my jam. One day I was chilling in Searing Gorge, and I came across some Night Elf punk killing one of my Horde brethren. Naturally, I murdered the crap out of him. Then, when the Horde player rezzed, we murdered the crap out of him again. At this point, the other Horde player starts messaging me in somewhat broken English, and he is mad. Apparently, he was a Chinese gold farmer, as was the Night Elf, and the Night Elf was trying to push him out of a prime farming spot, the Elementals in northwest Searing Gorge, if you remember. Now, to this guy, the Night Elf is basically taking food out of his family's mouth by screwing up his job. So we killed this guy a lot of times. Then, the guy adds me on his friends list and gives me some gold. After that, from time to time, he would message me for some help, and since, as I said, I loved World PvP, I would come around if I could and help him out, and he would hook me up with stuff. Eventually, I met a couple other people he worked with. I assume communication was always a little dodgy due to language issues, and became something of an on-call specialist for gold farmers being camped. I killed both normal alliance and, at times, what I think were rival gold farmers. I would, of course, camp them into oblivion to make sure they understood that these were no-go zones for them. The Horde farmers would happily compensate me, although if they found me some really good PvP, I would sometimes not take their money. Eventually, I started playing on a different server and lost track of them, but I will always think back fondly to my days running a gold farmer protection racket. And finally, we get to this submission from listener Salve, who tells us this. Hey guys, today I bring you my favorite memory from World of Warcraft, the story of Voodoo and Davidson. I didn't see anything against posting a post-classic memory, but if it's not allowed, please don't hesitate to remove it. It's allowed. Once upon a time on the server of Bloodscalp, I played an undead priest named Electro. I was a fresh 60 out in the world of Azeroth, traversing it upon my undead horse. I wasn't quite rich enough for the war horse. In the lands of Silithus, I came across a human warrior on his way to AQ. His name was Davidson, a member of the guild Heavy Hitters. I waved to him, seeing that he was much more geared than I was. Rather than return the wave, he charged in and attacked me, defeating me handily. From then on, I would see Davidson everywhere in the world, in front of a portal to Molten Core, on the pathway to Zul'Gurub, in battlegrounds and beyond. It's almost uncanny looking back on it, how often I ran into him. Some time passed and Burning Crusade launched. I abandoned my priest to roll a Blood Elf rogue that I named Voodoo. After grinding my way to 60, I was ready for my journey to the Outlands. I must have been 64 to 65 at the time, but I saw him. Again. Davidson was in Terakar Forest doing dailies. I dared not attack him. He was max level and presumably was at least heroic geared, so I let him be. Once I hit 70, it started to happen even more, but I was ready. Davidson and I would go toe-to-toe everywhere. Nagrand near Halar, Netherstorm south of Area 52, Shadow Moon Valley at the Netherdrake dailies, and even near the end of that expansion on the Isle of Keldanas. We would trade kills against each other, and it seemed that we were rather evenly matched. It was some of the most fun I've had PvPing in the world. We would reset our bodies, eat, and go back into the fray. We would even exchange the occasional /say message and emotes. Once Wrath began, I met him in the world leveling. We seemed to be on the same path, from the Howling Fjord into Dragonblight and then onto Sholazar Basin. We would fight everywhere. I remember the last time I saw him too. Once Cataclysm came around, I was capped at 85 doing dailies in Deepholm, and I saw him. Level 85 Davidson. There were many close skirmishes, with him winning a few and with me winning a few. After I killed him last, I had a dungeon pop. When I returned from my dungeon, he was gone. And from then, I never saw Davidson again. And that's Memory Lane for the week, everyone, and thank you so much to everyone who submitted for anger management and Memory Lane. As we head into the home stretch for this episode, I just want to run through a few listener emails, some feedback that the show gets, and I get a lot of feedback from the show, and it's so fantastic, and I get these really lengthy, amazing emails from all of you telling me your stories about how you came to be with World of Warcraft, and I can't thank you enough for sharing those stories. I try to share them when I can here at the end of the shows and also through the Discord, so please, keep them coming, guys. Don't feel that it ends with me. If you want to say hello, I will share it. So let's start with this one from listener 7, who says this. Now, these go for a little bit, so strap in, everyone. There's 2 or 3 of these to get through. Greetings, Josh. I want to preface this by saying I love the show, and as a casual player, I rage at almost every call. But it's rage in a good way, kind of like a positive, righteous rage. Like Dark Souls, I keep coming back for more. In a recent call, you had a few regulars come on discussing progressive itemization. Normally, I'd just listen and quietly rage, but this topic was too much. A community of #NoChanges is suddenly asking for Blizzard to cater to a vocal minority, as you often put it. Progressive itemization is a lot more vast than the single best-in-slot belt that they spoke about. It's something that could potentially be riddled with bugs, or worse, the dreaded Blizzard class balance. A lot of the item tweaking and refinement over the years came from trying to avoid breaking class balance, i.e. the Paladin tier. It was also based on what the average player could obtain. I don't know for sure since I was young and a filthy casual RPer back then, but from what I can research, very rarely were items changed because a portion of raiders were downing bosses 10% faster and 10% safer. Numbers pulled from Nefarian's Nethers. It's hard to debate based on my single 60 warrior from vanilla and my limited private server experience if progressive itemization is a good or a bad idea numbers-wise, but I do know the statistics of the player base on a few private servers. Of course, private servers are odd sources of information considering they're taboo amongst a large amount of the community, but they're all we have to go by for player population and retention rate. From the private server Northdale, we know that the average of / play time to 60 is 11 days 6 minutes. That marks most average private server players reaching 60 after 66 days of play, not accounting for long weekend sessions. The average play session of 4 hours per day is what I'm basing this off. I know it's not realistic. I believe if you look at the stats on any given fresh private server, not even 20% of the players actually make it to 60 before the 3-month mark out of the multiple thousands that play, which is kind of interesting when you look at where Dire Maul's release usually lands, but that's a comparably different can of worms. With such a small population raiding constantly, it's hard to justify Blizzard putting in extra work for what amounts to be a minority of a minority. The people who raid and the people that get the chance to utilize the items. Now, I'm not saying the change in DPS / overall healing numbers isn't going to be a problem, but a 3 to 8% difference on a boss fight here or there isn't going to break the game. It may shorten a few fights and make bad guilds do a little bit better, but we won't have an extra 10 or 15 Scarab Lords because of it. If Blizzard were to have progressive itemization, where would it fit in with their release schedule? No one is happy with their current release ideals, and the only thing preventing a community meltdown is the fact that Blizzard's release plan was just an idea. Imagine if they released a proposed itemization change schedule. That would probably go about as well as announcing class balance. In order to keep the game from becoming a patchwork abomination, pun most certainly intended, it is probably best to avoid progressive itemization, as it would require a team dedicated to making sure these mini patches don't break the game. The reasonable person wouldn't expect a re-release of the game to have changes drastically weaved in between content patches. To wrap this up like a school report, in a perfect world where we could get a full re-release of vanilla, Blizzard would no doubt devote a large number of resources to maintaining 100% one-to-one vanilla experience. But that is not this world. Sacrifices have to be made, and progressive itemization is quite minuscule in the grand scheme of things. Side note, I took recent Census data because I'm a turbo nerd using a modified version of the add-on Census Plus 3.5.1 on Northdale over a 2-day span and found that there were less than 5,000 active 60s after 6 months of that server. It sheds some holy light on their outrageous numbers from their recent year report. I love what you do, Josh. Keep up the good work. I would join in on your discussions on Discord if I hadn't been such a casual player in vanilla. A shout out to Billman, if I may. And if you ever need a memory lane submission, I have 2 WoW diaries full of them. As a long time RPer, I've kept all my storylines and day-to-day interactions written down since vanilla. With love, 7, your resident raging goblin. 7, thank you so much for that amazing email. I really do appreciate it. And absolutely, shout out to Billman. Hope you are listening along and enjoying that one from 7. And 7, please do let me say that please don't be shy in joining the Discord. There is no problem whatsoever with being casual back in vanilla. You look like, you're quite invested now. So please come on by and have a chat with us. We'd love to have you. And those memory lanes from the 2 WoW diaries. Wow, that sounds amazing. The fact that you kept a bit of a log of your time in the game, that sounds really interesting. If you've got some great stories from back in the day, I would love to read them, so please don't be shy. Next, we've got this one from listener Andrew L, who says this: Dearest Grand Chancellor of what I am pretty sure is Australia, I've been religiously listening to the podcast for about 3 weeks now, so much so that I've listened to about 60 episodes, not necessarily in order. That being said, if any of this was covered in an episode I've not gotten to yet, then I apologize to you in advance for reading this rant. But I am and always have been a Paladin main. I identify heavily with the class in all iterations of Warcraft as well as other games. So I bet you're thinking, oh god, here we go again with another Paladin crying about his class. Well, maybe that's true, but at least listen to my tears pitter-patter on the DPS ceiling of Ret Paladins for a few moments, since we all know that the Ret DPS ceiling is in fact lower than the level of my eyes. As it turns out, I'm not going to talk about our DPS at all, because I believe there's a simple way to fix Paladins. My main point here is that being the utility monsters that they are, there's just a couple of very simple things that could be done to give people a reason to take a Ret or 2 to a legit raid. And that is, give them utility that is attractive to raid leaders. Some examples. Put improved might deeper in the Ret tree. It literally has no impact to the game other than giving Ret relevance. Provide them with a raid buff similar to Nightfall built in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a magic debuff, but certainly it has to be relevant enough. Nightfall as a weapon already exists, so it wouldn't break anything. Give them a raid healing buff. Also, I'm no developer, but you could build something into the Vengeance talent so that every time a Ret crits, it makes healing in his vicinity more effective by a certain percentage. Or maybe just gives them additional crit percentage for the uptime of Vengeance, etc., etc. You could do a similar thing with mana regen. You are probably saying to yourself, boy, this is all well and good for someone who wants to play Ret, but they have 2 other specs. I've seen the argument of how they are supposed to have a hybrid tax. Jack of all trades, master of none, yada yada yada. Yet, arguably, Holy Paladins are in the top tier of healers, so that's bullshit. This is a hybrid class, so why are they stuck on 1 spec in raids and arguably 5-mans? A Ret with prot off-spec or vice versa should be at least reasonable to bring along in a legit raiding environment. All that said, I'll play and raid as a Paladin in any form. If Holy is the spec, then Holy I will play. I just think that so far in your interviews and talks about Paladins that nobody's mentioned the fact that Paladins can be indirectly made raid viable by giving them feasible raid utility rather than a pure DPS buff. That's probably a huge run-on sentence, but I'm 4 beers deep here, so spare me please. Since I didn't touch on prot much, I would also like to add that I think prot Paladins do have a place in dungeons pre-raid, so I'm a little less concerned there. I remember taking Skolo as a prot Paladin with very few problems as long as your DPS isn't trolling you. Red, however, has no real place in 5-man, 10-man, or raids. It exists only as a PvP spec per end game. Moral of the story, a holy plate wearing Avenger should not be a dress wearing, sitting in the back heal turret. That's not what a Paladin is. P.S. I am a Paladin main and my profession in real life is selling commercial light fixtures. So I literally sell the light in real life. Thank you so much for that one, Andrew. I really did appreciate that kind of love letter to Paladins, and I know that's going to resonate with a lot of Paladin players out there. Some might be saying, no, we're fine, don't change us. Or some might be agreeing with you, saying, yeah, they could do a little bit more for the class. Obviously, we do see a fair few Paladins on the forums going, look, we really could use a little bit more utility. I don't want to be sitting in the back with my cloth gear on, just pumping out heals all day. And obviously others say, hey man, that's the deal, so just accept it or fuck off. But I appreciate that there are certainly ways in which the game could be tinkered with if that ever happened, but I don't think it is ever happening, obviously, from everything we've heard from Blizzard. So, unfortunately, whilst your changes may never come, I appreciate putting the concepts out there. Now, finally, I do want to just address one very quick review that I got on iTunes. And if you haven't reviewed the show on iTunes, please do me a really big solid right now. If you're listening to this on your phone, if you're on your PC, if you've got access to the iTunes website, if you can quickly pull up the review thing on your phone, I'd really appreciate it if you gave a review for the show. It really does help out a little bit, and it takes all of 10 seconds, guys. So please, if you could do that, that would really, really help me out. Any kind words are really appreciated as well, or any shitty words if you hate the show. I completely appreciate whatever you want to say. So those reviews do help. If I could get a few more of those, I really do appreciate that. But this one was from a person called Druid of California, who said this over at the iTunes store. I'm technically deficient, but I'm doing my best as a late baby boomer, and I just love the show. I'm not playing now as I await the release next summer. I might jump in early to look at dungeons and reacquaint myself. I've been catching up on recent episodes of yours, and this time in Classic, I hope to raid and fully develop a character as I never maxed until BC. Your podcast gives me hope that my mediocre play is okay. Thanks for sucking, and I hate to brag, but I believe I'm worse. I do have a question about the game. I'm playing a new class and race, and I'm leaning towards Night Elf Druid. Quick question. Are Druid forms going to be the same as before? The cat, the travel, the bear, etc., etc. Thanks in advance. Next time you're in SoCal, beers or bourbon on me. And I just very quickly want to say, Druid of California, thank you so much for the kind words. As far as I know, to answer your question, yes, there's no reason to believe that anything would be different. I know some people might think of course, why would you think they would change any of that kind of stuff? But yes, to answer your question, I've got no reason to believe that anything would be different. I'm pretty sure it's safe to say I'd put $1 million on the fact that Druid forms will be the same. I hope you enjoy your Druid when you play Classic, and please do rest assured that they'll be just as they were, we hope. Anyway, that's everything for the day, everyone. Countdown to Classic will be taking a well-earned break over the holidays. So if you don't see an episode pop up until early January, that will be why. But just know that there are big things planned for 2019, and I look forward to having you all along for the ride as we enter the final stretch into the Countdown to Classic. So thank you so much to everyone who has sat with me through 2018. It has been an amazing year. I really cannot thank each and every one of you listening to this enough. You are the reason this show is what it is. It's all about you. I can't thank you enough. But there are some people I want to thank extra specially, and it's time for those thank yous now. So a big thank you to patrons Connor C, Damien A, Eric L, Hurlbert, John H.C, Jamie S, Michael H, Minoru, Randall H, Tim B, Tim S, and Zudamos. And of course, as always, the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic, the higher echelon ones. An extra special shout out and thank you from the bottom of my heart to Billy C, Firespittin' Kitten, Flosy B, Carl W, Nick B, Palfurus, Romani, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Valaco. Thank you so very much for your amazing support of the show. You all know that Countdown to Classic simply would not be the same without your support, and we certainly wouldn't be going into 2019 without your support. So thank you for being one of the reasons that this show continues to keep on keeping on. And please, if you're in the Discord, if you see some of these legendary patrons sitting around or chatting, just say hello and say thanks. We really do appreciate the input that they have, obviously, with the show, and the financial support that they put in to make sure that I keep kicking myself up the bum to keep on going with the show. So thanks so much to them. But look, that's it, everyone. I will speak to you when I'm back from the holidays, and until then, signing off from Down Under. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, all of it. Have a great one, everyone.